Chapter 1400. Ahuli's idea was good, and he was learning the Han's way of governing a country. However, the problem was that this was Siberia, which was sparsely populated. It was not a bustling city where the Han lived. There were no fertile fields here, unlike the Han's land, which was filled with the fragrance of rice and flowers. This was the so-called Handan learning to walk. In the end, he would even forget how he walked. Ahuli seemed to be walking on that path, which naturally attracted Shikai's dissatisfaction. Another general, Bushi, also had a headache when he heard his decision. What's wrong with the great Khan? Why isn't brother Shikai persuading him? Bushi's face was filled with confusion. Normally this kind of thing had happened before, but most of them had been persuaded, unless it was mentioned many times and it was not easy to stop them. However, this seemed to be the first time he mentioned it. How can we persuade him? Can we persuade him this time, but can we persuade him next time? How is he still a great Khan? He's clearly learning from the Han. If this goes on, I'm afraid that the soldiers won't even be able to afford food and clothing. How can we fight then? If someone makes a move on us, how can we guard against it? Shikai's face was filled with anger. He even forgot the rules and began to criticize the great Khan. In this regard, Bushi immediately shut his mouth. The other party spoke without thinking in a fit of anger. He could not make such a mistake. Bushi did not speak again, which made Shikai, who was testing him, somewhat dissatisfied. What? I've already passed the words over. Why don't you say something? Why are you pretending to be mute? Shikai wanted to see Bushi's opinion because he already had thoughts of rebelling. During the new year, Hulahin sent someone to find him in private and expressed that he was willing to help him become the Khan of the Great Raven City. Hulahin naturally did this because he was threatened by Ahuli. As the security of the Great Raven City became better and better, and the citizens responded positively, the surrounding powers were naturally affected. Just like Hulahin's Wuxia city, at least 1,000 households had already left the city, heading for Ahu's great Wuxia city. Just based on this point, he could not ignore it. If it wasn't for the fact that he had suffered a huge loss in the battle with the 5-star army and couldn't use force to solve the problem, he would have already led his troops over. Since he could not send out his troops, Hulahin thought of another method, which was to let someone else be the great Khan and replace him. As long as the Great Crow City's policy towards the commoners changed, it would not attract other commoners. This way the threat to him would not exist. With this thought in mind, the special envoy sent out by Hurahin found the most likely candidate to replace him, General Sakir, and explained his thoughts. He even offered 10,000 taels of silver and promised to send over 1,000 cows and sheep as a congratulatory gift after the matter was settled. This naturally made Cicero overjoyed. He didn't really care about these things. What he liked was Hulahin's attitude towards him. This was the great Khan with the greatest influence in Siberia. Even he thought highly of him and supported him. Didn't that mean that he was the most capable person who should be in the top position? It was also from then on that Cicero had the idea of seizing the position. During this period of time, he had also talked to some of his trusted subordinates and tactfully probed them. He really managed to persuade a few Kiliarchs to stand on his side. Cicero, who was growing more and more powerful, saw hope. This time he took this opportunity to find Bushi. He was also testing the other party. The entire Great Crow City only had 20,000 cavalry. The two of them each controlled 10,000 troops. If he could obtain this person's support, he would succeed. However, this time, Bushi did not say anything. This made Cycle unhappy, but he couldn't show it on his face. Not only that, he could not give up. He knew that once he opened his mouth, there had to be an outcome. Otherwise, it would be too disadvantageous for him. Fortunately, this Bushi had a fatal flaw, which was that he liked women very much. This general's wealth was basically all used on this path. Coincidentally, Cicero had 2 clean girls in his hands. He had originally planned to leave them for himself, but ever since he became ambitious, he prepared to give them to his trusted subordinates to win people's hearts. This time, in order to obtain Bushi's support, he decided to give up his capital. Looking at Bushi, who did not say anything, Cicero laughed and said casually, "Okay, then let's not talk about annoying things. Tonight, come to my residence to drink. You know, I have a pair of white Russian oviparous sisters. Tonight, this general wants to take them into my room. Such a big matter, I should share it with my friends. Drinking big bowls and eating big pieces of meat, isn't that great?" Finally, he stopped talking about the great Khan. Bushi let out a sigh of relief. He was not a fool, so he could naturally sense Shikai's disloyal heart. Just now, this person had actually talked about the great Khan. He had already thought about it. After a while, he would go talk to the great Khan and do his duty as a subject. Not mentioning the official matter, Bushi laughed and said, That's good. Since that's the case, I will definitely visit Brother Shi's residence tonight. Ah, good. Since that's the case, let's go now. We can enjoy the White Russian dance. It's quite interesting compared to us Mongolian women. Cicero laughed loudly and stood up to walk to Bushi's side, looking like he wanted to go with him. He was being watched. Considering that if he did not go now, he might attract Cicero's suspicion. Bushi could only agree and said, "Since that's the case, please." Please. Cicero laughed loudly. When he turned around, he raised his eyebrows and a vicious look flashed in his eyes. He had already made up his mind. Tonight he would have a showdown with Bushi. If the other party was tactful, then everything would be fine. If the plan did not work, then he could only kill the other party. Cicero's residence. When he returned to the courtyard, the servants began to prepare the banquet. Cicero accompanied him the entire time and did not leave his side at all. This made Bushi unable to find an excuse to go. He had no choice but to calm down and put his worries aside for the time being. Two young girls about 1.7 meters tall with graceful figures and incomparably white skin appeared on the stage. As two girls who had been seriously trained, their dance steps were graceful. Wearing almost transparent sand clothes, they were graceful and graceful. Every movement was filled with flirtatious charm. In just a short while, the lustful Bushi's eyes were fixed on the two girls. He did not move even half a step. Seeing Bushi's devilish appearance, Cicero's eyes flashed with disdain. He then continued to urge him to drink. Not long after, the two girls also walked down the stage. One on the left and one on the right, they nestled beside Bushi. Cup after cup of horse milk wine was poured into their mouths. For a moment he did not know how much he had drunk. After a moment of dizziness he lost consciousness. When he woke up again it was already the middle of the night. Shaking his somewhat dizzy head, he began to observe his surroundings. What entered his eyes was 4 spotlessly white jade-like arms placed in front of his chest. Upon closer inspection, who else could they be but the twin Russian sisters? Bang! Bushi sat up, followed by 2 screams. Then the candles in the room were lit. One by one the guards of the mansion walked into the bedroom. Their fierce eyes were fixed on the half-naked Bushi who was still at a loss of what to do. What is this? Before Bushi could ask his question, footsteps sounded again. Another set of footsteps came from outside the door. Then Cyril walked in accompanied by a few bodyguards. When his eyes met Tracy's and he saw the scene in the bedroom, his eyes widened. He shouted sternly, "What's going on?" This general only went to the army to deal with some urgent military matters. How could something like this happen? General Bushi drank too much wine. After you left, he pestered the 2 girls and chased us out. He even said that this was the general's order and we did not dare to disobey. But I never thought that General Bushi would do such a despicable thing. We really didn't expect this. Now that we have made a big mistake, please punish us, General. After the 4 guards who had entered the bedroom first finished speaking, they knelt on the ground with a plop. What? There is such a thing? You all deserve to die. Men. Hearing this, the furious Cicero's face changed. He pointed at the 4 guards and said, "Dereliction of duty. Take them away and give each of them 30 strokes of the military rod." Yes. The personal guards behind Cicero acknowledged and went forward to drag the 4 kneeling personal guards away. Soon after, everyone walked out of the bedroom. Soon after, miserable screams rang out in the courtyard. Every time there was a sound, Bushi, who was still half naked, would frown. Then he looked at the 2 Russian women lying on the side who had already woken up. Looking at their fearful eyes, his heart was filled with bitterness. At this moment, if he still did not know that he had been set up, then he would not be worthy of being a 10,000-man commander. He did not believe that he would do such a stupid thing after drinking too much. It was true that he was lustful, but his alcohol tolerance was not bad. It was not to the extent that he could not control his body just because he drank in someone else's house. The reason why such a thing happened must be because there was something wrong with the wine. He was afraid that there was medicine there. He should have been carried here while he was unconscious. Needless to say, the mastermind behind all of this was Cicero. It seemed that when he showed his dissatisfaction with the Great Khan during the day, he did not receive a reply. He had misgivings and used all kinds of despicable methods. Now that he had something on him, it was time to talk about the conditions. Cicero was also staring at Bushi. He had to admit that his method was a bit too straightforward. However, he was not a smart person. It was not easy for him to think of such a method. The most important thing was that it was effective. With Ahuli's temperament, he had already given a strict order in the Great Crow City to prohibit any bullying of men and women. If it was discovered, regardless of the identity of the offender, they would be severely punished. In addition, Bushi's mouth was not good when it came to women. As long as this matter was reported to the Great Khan, it would be inevitable. After that, it was only natural that he would be stripped of his status as a major. Chapter 1401. In other words, at this time, Zyker had already grasped Bushi's lifeline. Next, it would depend on whether the other party cooperated with him. If he didn't, he could only report this matter. Without a helper, he couldn't have another opponent. AI. Bushi suddenly opened his mouth. First, he let out a long sigh, then said with some bitterness, "Brother Shi, if you have something to say, just say it. Why do you have to beat around the bush? Don't you have a problem with the Great Khan? What do you want to do? Brother will cooperate with you." In this short period of time, Bushi also understood that he was now a fish on the chopping block. If he didn't cooperate, he would lose his position and be severely punished. If a person who was used to being a general suddenly lost his military power, what was the difference between him and a dead man? Originally, he was still thinking about how to persuade Bushi. If the other party refused to comply, would he really report it to the Great Khan? If this person saw the Great Khan and told the whole story, although the Great Khan might not believe it, the Great Khan would definitely be on guard against him. In this way, it wouldn't be a good thing for his plan. Unexpectedly, when he was still thinking about what to do next, the other party had already opened his mouth and admitted defeat. Zyker naturally wasn't worried that Bushi would lie to him. Just now, not only him but also the 8 guards had witnessed everything. It was far from something that Bushi could just pull up his pants and deny. Since that was the case, didn't it mean that his plan had succeeded? The happy Zyker's face was no longer angry. Instead he laughed. "Haha, Brother Bushi is really a smart person. Since that's the case, let's not beat around the bush in front of a straightforward person. I'll be frank with you. What the Great Khan has done is in conflict with our Mongolian traditions in too many ways. Since the beginning of our ancestors, we've been robbing people for a living. We've never done anything like business or governing a city. You still want to ask for so many rules and regulations? Do you really think you're a saint or a gentleman? If this goes on, the people will be happy, but the warriors won't even be able to eat. Isn't this putting the cart before the horse?" First, he complained a lot, acting like a whore who still wanted to establish a monument to her chastity. He talked about many of the Great Khan's problems. Then his tone changed and he said righteously, "For the future of the Mongolian warriors, this general has decided to remonstrate with the Great Khan. It's just that my strength alone is meager, so I need Brother Bushi's help." Finally, the dagger, Bushi secretly said in his heart, "This is really a traitor." Pretending to be shocked, Bushi said, "Brother Shi, if this matter doesn't succeed, it will be a death sentence." "What? Is Brother Bu still afraid? What kind of thing do you not dare to do?" As he spoke, he glanced sideways at the 2 Caucasian twin sisters who were still lying on the bed, their clothes slightly disheveled. These 2 women were evidence. Before the matter was settled, it was better not to touch the scene. He had already checked, these 2 women did not know Mongolian, so he could say anything in front of them without worry. This. He cursed in his heart. He was basically drugged and sent here. He didn't even touch a single hair on these 2 women. Wasn't it too unfair to threaten him with this? Naturally, this was just a thought in his heart. Bushi did not dare to question it because if this matter was known by the Great Khan, he was afraid that no one would listen to his side of the story. Seeing that Bushi did not immediately object and was thinking about it, Zyker was overjoyed. He quickly said, "Besides, it's not like I didn't make any preparations. There are already several Kiliarchs in the army who have agreed to work for me. Even one of the Great Khan's personal guards is already one of my men. Believe me, as long as you and I work together, we will succeed." Finally showing his trump card, Bushi sighed in his heart. He knew that if he had heard all these things, then he would definitely not have the chance to object now. In other words, he would either rebel with Shikir or he would die. "Brother Bushi, as long as you help me succeed, you will be second only to one person and above millions of people. Not only will I give you these 2 sisters, as long as you take a fancy to any woman in the city, you can capture them and bring them home. Wouldn't that be great?" Zyker continued to raise the price. He had already investigated, this lecherous man often lingered in the city's brothels, especially the few pretty girls that he had visited several times. If it was not for the fact that the other party was a virgin and could not be forced, he would have already married her as a concubine. As long as Ahuri was still the Great Khan, he would not be able to carry out this plan. Thus, overthrowing Ahuri would most likely be beneficial to Bushi. After promising many benefits, The light in Bushi's eyes grew brighter and brighter. When he saw the white Russian sisters from the corner of his eyes, his instincts won over his rationality. He finally nodded and said, "In that case, Bushi is willing to follow Brother Ziker's lead." "Oh haha, good brother. Don't worry, once I become the great Khan, I will definitely not treat you unfairly. At that time we will jointly control the Great Crow City and share wealth, haha." Finally achieving his wish, Ziker's face was filled with joy. The cooperation had been reached. According to Ziker's intention, Bushi would stay the night here. This time he guaranteed that no one would disturb them. However, how could Bushi, who had something on his mind, sleep? He had to go back and call for his trusted subordinates to work with them. Ziker also knew that the important matter was more important, so he nodded and praised, "Good, in that case you can go back and prepare. Don't worry, these sisters will definitely be left for General Bushi." "In that case, many thanks," Bushi said indifferently. Once the matter was settled, he would not only have this pair of sisters by his side. There would only be more women serving him. At that time, wouldn't it be beautiful every night? Bushi finally put on his clothes and said goodbye to Ziker. After adding a large helping hand, Ziker was in a good mood. He immediately headed to the back of the residence. Although the sisters in front of him were not bad looking, he had already promised Bushi and would not go back on his word. Ziker left. Before he left, he told the two women to have a good night's sleep and instructed the guards not to disturb them. However, what he did not know was that right after he left, the elder sister quickly got up and put on a jacket. Then she took out a note that she had prepared beforehand and wrote something on it. About an hour later, the soft meowing of a cat could be heard from outside the window. After 3 consecutive beeps, the window of the room opened from the inside. A slender arm stretched out, and a note was thrown out of the window. A black shadow came as promised. He picked up the note and quickly left. In the pitch-black night he was like a ghost, coming and going in a hurry. No one noticed or thought that this pair of Caucasian oviparous sisters had another identity. They were outside agents of Yang Xie's intelligence department. Yang Xie's intelligence department was mainly made up of 2 major parts. One was the earliest security bureau, and the other was the Central Intelligence Bureau, which was established later. The former followed Yang San's lead and was mostly men. The latter was led by Madame Su Maner and was mostly women. This way they could ensure that there were few blind spots in the information and they could also supervise each other. This pair of Caucasian oviparous sisters were outside agents of the Central Intelligence Bureau. Everywhere they went, developing young and beautiful women had long been something that the Central Intelligence Bureau's core personnel had to do. At first glance, these weak women did not seem to be of much use. However, when their natural beauty and good looks were put to use, they could obtain information that men could not obtain even if they worked hard for a long time. Just like the information this time, it was obtained so easily and without any effort. Originally, the 2 women were already prepared to counterattack. In order to preserve their innocence, no matter who the man in front of them was, whether it was Siqian or Busi, the 2 women would use their newly learned joint killing technique to kill them. If they were completely unprepared, and if they intentionally got the other party drunk, they would have at least a 60% chance of success. No matter what they did, not only would they preserve their innocence, they would also make a great contribution. They would eliminate a threatening opponent for the 5-star army. They never thought that the development of the situation would be so dramatic. Before the 2 women could take the risk, they received such important information. How could they not understand Mongolian? They were just pretending that they did not understand. Now they had indeed made a great contribution. The news of the 2 women was sent out by a guard in charge of their safety. It did not take long for it to reach Yang Qindong's hands. After reading the information, Yang Qindong pondered for a moment, then raised his eyebrows and said with a smile, "The CIA has made a great contribution this time and should be rewarded. I never thought that a Huri would be so different from the other Mongolian Khans. This is a person who wholeheartedly wants to work for the people. Try to win him over." "Young master, I understand. I will arrange it now." Beta Persei could be said to be the person who understood Yang Qindong's thoughts the most, so she immediately agreed. "Well, you must find a way to protect a Huri's life. This matter can be done by the Security Bureau in cooperation with the CIA." Yang Qindong certainly knew that the 2 intelligence departments had the intention to compete with each other. When there was a comparison, they would be more motivated to work together. But sometimes, it was inevitable that there would be some constraints under the competition. This time, he directly pointed out the relationship between the 2 because he did not want to see the problem arise from the insiders. "I will give a stern warning to some people. Beta Persei nodded heavily. When he walked to the telegraph office, he thought for a moment and sent a telegram to his brother Yang San, asking him to restrain his subordinates. This time the CIA's team leader was in charge. In the Great Raven City, whether it was Cecil or General Bushi, they were making all kinds of preparations. They were constantly calling their generals to meet and prepare for the food uprising. Ahuri, as their great Khan, was completely unaware of all this. He still focused on the people's livelihood. Chapter 1402. Ahuli had a tough life. His mother had died in childbirth when he was born, and his father had died in a battle between the tribes when he was not even 3 years old. He had practically begged for food since he was young, and had seen countless hardships. At that time, the happiest thing was that he could have a safe place to stay and eat his fill. Perhaps because he had suffered too much since he was young, after Ahuli became famous, he did not want the people under his rule to suffer like that. Thus, he began to care about the people. Although he did not have a foundation and did not know how to farm, and did not do many things well, the good governance of the Great Crow City still attracted the attention of many people. When he saw the number of people in the city increasing, Ahuli's eyes would always flash with excitement. No matter what, he had provided a safe living environment for everyone. Just this point alone was a great contribution. A great Khan who did not pay attention to the army under him, but to see how the ordinary people were doing? It had to be said that it was a kind of weirdo. His every action had attracted the dissatisfaction of some people in the army, and his situation had become dangerous. However, no one knew the true purpose of Chen Huli's actions. Just like now, what he had in his hands was the list of recruits who had signed up to join the army. As a great Khan, he had seriously looked for a Han Shiozai to teach him how to read. Just from this point alone, it could be seen that he was more ambitious than other Mongol great Khans. There were more than 400 people on this list, and they were all weak Mongol and White Russian tribesmen who had just arrived at the Great Crow City. They were grateful that Ahuli had brought them a safe living environment, so they wanted to join the army to repay his kindness. Haha, this is the result. Looking at this list, Ahuli's face was filled with excitement, and when he spoke, his voice trembled slightly. How could someone as smart as him not know that his actions had already caused some people to dislike him? However, he didn't say anything because he knew very well that he was going to walk a completely different path from the other Mongol Khans. Since they were different, it was natural that they would be met with some confusion and even criticism. However, once he succeeded, the rewards would be great. Before he succeeded, all he needed to do was continue to persevere and withstand all the pressure. Fortunately, the results were not bad. Although he had been misunderstood for a few years, the results were finally showing. More than 400 people joined the army today. If this continued, wouldn't it be easy for him to achieve his goal of expanding the army? At that time, when he had enough troops, who in the Siberian region would be his match? Considering the geographical environment, the lack of population was the biggest obstacle to Ahuli's development. For example, wasn't the reason why people called him the most powerful great Khan in Wuxia was because he had 30,000 soldiers, far more than Ahuli's 20,000 soldiers? And if there was a day when his military strength reached 30,000, he would have the qualifications to compete with them. At that time, would he still be far from the position of the biggest Khan in this region? Ahuli's hard work finally bore fruit and he saw hope. Ahuli was overjoyed and wanted to share the results with others. He ordered his bodyguards to summon Sikar and Bushi. He wanted to announce the results in front of everyone and let his two important subordinates know how powerful he was as the great Khan. Ahuli was still thinking about how the two highly regarded generals would be as excited as he was once they knew that there were so many new recruits joining the army. However, all of a sudden, the sound of battle cries came from outside. Following that, his personal guard captain ran to him with a panicked expression. He knelt down and said, "Great Khan, something bad has happened. Generals Sikar and Bushi have brought people to surround our residence. They are now bringing people to kill us." What's going on? Ahuli was shocked and his eyes were as big as bells. He reached out and grabbed the captain's collar as he shouted. This should be because they want to rebel." The captain of the bodyguards replied with a pale face. He had heard some rumors before, saying that the great Khan didn't do his job properly and helped the people instead of the soldiers. He had reminded the great Khan many times about this, but the great Khan didn't take it to heart. Ahuli loosened his grip and murmured, "Rebellion? Rebellion? Why are they here? They don't know this Khan's good intentions." Seeing that the great Khan was still lamenting, the captain couldn't help but say anxiously, "Please lead us to a bloody path. We are willing to use our lives to protect the great Khan." "No need. In the blink of an eye, Ahuli had recovered his previous calmness. He waved his hand and said confidently, "Since they have already surrounded our courtyard, how can it be so easy to break out? Come, follow this Khan. I want to ask the two generals, where did this Khan go wrong?" Since there was no escape, it was better to face it calmly. After saying this, Ahuli strode out. Outside the courtyard, there were already more than 20 corpses lying on the ground. Among them were Ahuli's personal guards as well as the personal guards brought by Shikai and Busi. Since the matter was settled, the two of them led a group of reliable personal guards to kill their way over. As long as Ahuli was dead, there would be no obstacles in their way to take over the military. Stop. Ahuli walked out of the inner courtyard. When he arrived at the courtyard, he shouted, separating the two sides of personal guards. No matter what, he had been the Great Khan for several years and his aura was still quite impressive. Taking advantage of the temporary pause in the fighting, he strode to the battlefield and pointed with his right hand. "Where are Shikai and Busi? You even dare to rebel? Don't tell me you don't even have the courage to show your face?" After all, he had been the Great Khan for so many years. Ahuli's strong body trembled, and the entire place fell silent. Everyone involuntarily put down their weapons. Even Shikai and Busi, who were hiding behind the personal guards, could only take the initiative to stand out. At this moment, they definitely wouldn't show the slightest bit of fear. If even they were afraid, how would the soldiers below react? "Are you finally not going to be a coward?" Seeing that his two most trusted subordinates had finally walked out, Ahuli asked with a furious expression. He didn't think he had mistreated these two, especially Shikai. Back then he had even saved Shikai's life. Why did he want to rebel now? Although Shikai was very talkative when he talked about Ahuli behind Ahuli's back, he immediately became mute in front of the real person. He was used to being inferior to others, and on top of that, Ahuli was his savior. He didn't have much confidence. Shikai stood out with a frown on his face, not saying a word. Busi, on the other hand, was a bit unhappy. "What? You're admitting defeat when it's time for real? What about me? You two have a good relationship. Perhaps even if the rebellion fails, I can't really kill you. But I can't." Busi admitted that his relationship with Ahuli wasn't bad, but it wasn't so good that he could ignore everything. Thus, he had no other choice at this moment. "Ahuli, there's no need for you to be hypocritical here. You want us all to work for you, but you only have the lowliest commoners in your eyes. May I ask if you're a qualified Great Khan?" He was afraid that his momentum would weaken, and he was also afraid that Shikai would shake the morale of the troops, causing everything to go to waste. He had no choice but to speak up. When Ahuli heard Busi's question, he was infuriated. Everything that this person had now was given to him by him. It was hateful that he didn't know how to repay his kindness. Now he actually dared to call him by his name. He really wanted to rebel. After thinking about it, he pointed at Yoshi and said, "Shikai, did you listen to the slanderous words of this despicable person?" At this moment, Shikai also came back to his senses. He thought that once he became the Great Khan, everything here would be his. He wouldn't have to look at other people's faces anymore. At this moment, his expression changed from hesitation to determination. The brave Ahuli of the past is already dead. The current you is not worthy of the position of Great Khan. Stretching out his finger, Zyker pointed at Ahuli, his eyes filled with determination. After finally saying those words, Cycle felt his whole body relax a lot, as if a huge rock that was pressing down on him had suddenly been removed. Good. Ahuli staggered. Even the person he trusted the most, the person who had saved his life, was rebelling against him. This was really his failure as a person. Thinking about how he had struggled for half his life, only to be betrayed by his friends and family, Ahuli couldn't help but laugh at the sky. "Ha ha ha, you're just a group of short-sighted despicable people. You don't understand this Khan's painstaking efforts." Ahuli really had a lot to say. From a poor boy with no background to the current position of Khan of a tribe, he had experienced too much and seen too much. Therefore he had a lot of ideas of his own. In his opinion, Mongolia should not be nomadic. At the very least, it should enter a half-pastoral and half-agricultural state. They had to ensure that they had production. This wasn't just a sign of progress. More importantly, plundering wasn't the way to strengthen oneself. Just like in the past dynasties, they mainly looted and plundered. Many times they even treated the land of China as their own back garden, giving people the feeling that they had no money and no food. Just by walking around here they would have everything. It seemed like they had endless glory, but who knew about their own suffering? If it wasn't for the fact that they had no food and couldn't survive, why would they do something like plundering that could cost them their lives? Not to mention, whenever a heroic ruler appeared in China, they would send troops to the grasslands to train. It was as if only by defeating them could they prove the strength and wisdom of the Han people. Chapter 1403. For this reason, sometimes the location of the loot would change. Wasn't this all because he didn't care about production and didn't understand construction and management? Unfortunately, not many people could understand such a simple principle, and no one thought of changing it. Now he decided to make some changes. If he succeeded, it would be equivalent to finding another way for the Mongols to survive other than being nomads. After a few years, he had accumulated some experience and laid a good foundation for the people. If he continued, things would definitely get better and better. If his subordinates rebelled, wouldn't everything be for naught? He didn't want to hand over his achievements just like that, nor did he want his efforts to go to waste. More than that, he wanted to prove that he was still brave and good at fighting. He stretched out his hand and said, "Men, bring me this Khan's mace." Ahuli himself had boundless strength. It was precisely because of this that he was able to defeat countless opponents and become the current Khan. Although he had mainly focused on building the city in the past few years, he still had his own foundation. He believed that he would have no problem dealing with Cycle and Busi working together. He stretched out his arm, but it was not the huge mace that responded to him. On the contrary, a machete suddenly came slashing at him. With a gust of wind, Ahuli instinctively moved his body to the side. It was this one step that saved his life, but there was already a bright red wound under his ribs. It could be imagined that if he hadn't dodged in time, his life would have been taken away just now. After being slashed by the scimitar, Ahuli, who was already injured, immediately turned around and saw his bodyguard captain staring at him with wide eyes and a nervous expression. He angrily stretched out his arm and pointed at him. "Even you are rebelling against this Khan?" No. This sudden scene and this sudden accusation stunned the other bodyguards at first, but then they came back to their senses. In particular, the captain of the bodyguards, who was not far away, directly slashed his scimitar across the neck of the captain. Immediately, blood splashed high into the air, and the captain fell to the ground with a terrified expression, dead. After the captain killed the captain, he led a group of bodyguards in front of Ahuli and shouted, "We pledge our lives to follow the great Khan." Ahuli smiled with relief. He was not a complete failure as a person. With a sigh, he reached out and took the mace handed to him by another woman. Then he turned to look at CKE and Percy and said, "Come, let's fight. I want to see who is the true barter of the grasslands. He's already injured. He won't be able to hold on for much longer. Let's go together." Seeing that Ahuli was still so heroic, Cicero's expression couldn't help but change. But now that things had come to this, it was either you die or I die. He no longer had a choice. After he said that to Bushi, the two of them stepped forward together and surrounded Ahuli from both sides. The three main generals fought together, and the bodyguards below also began to fall into chaos. In a short period of time, the courtyard was filled with the sounds of weapons clashing. From time to time, there would be Mongolian warriors falling to the ground. The smell of blood quickly filled the small courtyard, making people want to vomit. Ahuli's awe-inspiring aura was not any less than before. He waved the 38 gene mace in his hand and repeatedly forced Percy to retreat to the side. If not for Cicero saving him a few times, he would have already been smashed under the mace. "Haha, let's see if this Khan is heroic." Cough cough. Ahuli, who had just shouted, could not help but cough a few times. In the end, because of the wound, he had lost too much blood and had damaged his foundation. Now that he was bleeding profusely, if this continued, he would not be able to hold on for much longer. When Cicero saw Ahuli's performance, he could not help but be happy and said, "He's almost done. Let's hold on for a bit longer." Percy looked at the large hole in his scimitar caused by the collision with the mace and gritted his teeth as he replied. After all, they had the advantage in numbers and were the ones who initiated the attack. After 15 minutes, most of Ahuli's bodyguards were dead. Even Ahuli himself had lost too much blood and was showing signs of weakness. Whether it was his strength or reflexes, he was not even a quarter of his usual strength. Cicero saw the changes in Ahuli and his eyes shone brightly. He could almost see the throne of the great Khan in front of him. He could almost see the moment when thousands of people would submit to him. Is this Khan really going to die here? Ahuli's face was full of grievance and unwillingness. When he felt that the strength in his body was about to be sucked dry, he knew his end. At this moment he was filled with regret. Could it be that he was wrong? Could it be that the Mongolian warriors were destined to only have one path? Boom. Just when everyone was thinking about different things, a huge explosion suddenly sounded out. A large part of the walls of the courtyard collapsed due to the explosion, revealing a temporary path for horses to pass through. Amidst the huge explosion, the two sides who were fighting in the courtyard could not help but stop. Everyone could not understand what was going on. Why would there be an explosion? Could it be that it was caused by lightning? Great Khan, quickly leave with us. Just when everyone was still in a daze, a dozen men dressed in ordinary Mongolian clothing rushed in through the gap. They quickly walked to the injured Ahuli and shouted, "You are." Seeing that the newcomers were unfamiliar and that he could not figure out their identities, Ahu revealed a nervous expression. "Great Khan, quickly leave. The commotion here will attract more people. If you don't leave now, it will be too late." One of the men said hurriedly, then nodded to the people behind him. One of them walked out and pulled over a strong horse, then helped Ahuli onto the horse. The other Mongolian people were holding Big Dipper crossbows. With a few shots, they forced back Shikai and Bushi, who wanted to charge forward. Then, under everyone's gaze, they turned around and left. "General, we have to chase after them. Don't let them escape." Bushi shouted anxiously, intending to chase after them. "Let them go. Ahuli is injured and has lost so much blood. It will be difficult for him to survive. It is only a beast king that is about to die. He is no longer a threat to us. There are more important things waiting for us to do." Shikai shook his head. He was very wary of the Big Dipper crossbows in the hands of those Mongolian people. He had a feeling that they did not intend to kill him. Otherwise he would be dead by now. Although he was curious about the other party's background and why they appeared at such a crucial time, he still did not have enough control over the army. There were still many loyal followers of Ahuli. Now that he had to deal with them, he had no choice but to let Ahuli leave with his injuries. Ahuli escaped. He only brought along 2 bodyguards who were also injured. Halfway through, he fainted due to excessive blood loss. He did not even have the chance to ask who saved him. "This is caused by excessive blood loss. Take him to a safe place. Check his blood type and prepare to transfuse." Leader Wang Guang examined one of the wounds and made a decision after pulling up Ahuli's eyelids. Wang Guang, the leader of the Security Bureau's operations in Siberia, was ordered by the CIA's operations leader, Meng Li, to save Ahuli. The news was reported to Meng Li by the Caucasian Ovipar sisters, which gave the CIA the upper hand. It was not easy for Wang Guang to receive the mission to save Ahuli. No matter what, he had to complete it well. Otherwise he would really lose out to those women in the CIA. Not long after Ahuli left, the Inner Mongolian soldiers who heard the explosion rushed over. Then Cycle said that the Khan had been attacked and was killed by the explosion. Now he was in charge of the city. With the support of Busi and the other Kiliarchs, although there were still some Kiliarchs who did not understand, without Ahuli's leadership, they could only behave for the time being. Before seeing Ahuli's corpse and hearing the news of his death, Cycle was still very cautious. He did not immediately change the policies in the Great Crow City. It looked like it was still the same as before. The only difference was that there were more Mongolian soldiers patrolling the streets. Although the explosion that day was sudden, Ahuli was still an extremely strict general. After the explosion, the soldiers guarding the city closed the 4 cities. Before confirming that Ahuli had not left the city, Cycle increased the intensity of the search. Only when he saw Ahuli's corpse would he be at ease to ascend the throne and do what he wanted to do. Although the city gates were closed and no one could leave the city without a warrant, sending out a telegram did not require the permission of the soldiers guarding the city. The telecommunications department received the telegram from the intelligence department on time. After knowing that Ahuli had been saved and that he would be able to get out of bed in about 3 days, Yang Qindong gave the order that the army must arrive at the Great Crow City on time within 3 days. At that time he would come to the center and coordinate with the outside. No one knew about the arrival of the 5-star army. This was due to their knowledge of the weather. Before the snow melted, it was not suitable to mobilize an army. Not to mention the 5-star army scouting methods were not something normal Mongolian scouts could compare to. With their telescopes, as long as they were careful, it would not be hard to discover the enemy's cavalry. Along the way, the 5-star army scouts had captured and killed close to 50 Mongolian scouts. Finally, on the 3rd day, they arrived 5 li outside of the Great Crow City. Following Yang Qindong's orders, the army hid and rested. They would wait for orders to attack tomorrow. At this time within the city, Cycle, who did not know anything about the outside world, was frowning and looking at General Busi. It had been 7 days since the start of the search. According to the soldiers, they had already turned the Great Crow City upside down. However, there was still no news of Ahuli. This made them both worried and happy. Chapter 1404. They were happy because so much time had passed. With the amount of blood Ahuri had lost, he must have died a long time ago. What he was worried about was that anything could happen before they saw Ahuli's body. They were too focused on Ahuri's matter. No one cared about the fact that the scouts outside the city had not contacted them for a few days. Perhaps the two generals thought that the weather had just improved and no one would have any ideas about the Great Wu city. After a few years of living peacefully, they had let down their guard and decided their ending. Announce it, Great Khan. After a long time, Bushi finally stopped being silent and expressed his attitude. Shikai's body shook when he heard this. His long-time wish was about to be fulfilled. It was impossible to say that he was not moved. But before there was a confirmation of Ahuri's death, he was still a little nervous. Seeing that Shikai did not immediately agree, Bushi tried to persuade him again. Great Khan, the army cannot be without a commander for a day. As long as you succeed the position of Great Khan, even if Ahuli comes back to life, what can he do? At that time the army will be full of generals who support the Great Khan. There is no need to worry about any storms. But if this drags on for too long, the army will become unstable. Shikai also knew that Bushi's words were for his own good. He thought that as long as he succeeded the position of Great Khan, the matter would be settled. Even if there was a problem, he could use the position of Great Khan to give orders. In the end he nodded. Good, then I will have to trouble General Bushi. Shikai finally agreed. Bushi's face was naturally filled with joy. He quickly said, Good, then the Great Khan will leave everything to me. Tomorrow is the auspicious day. I will go and prepare. Soon the news spread throughout the army. Since Great Khan Ahuri had died in battle, the most senior and most meritorious Shikai would succeed the position of Great Khan. The ceremony would be held tomorrow morning. At that time, all the cavalry would be given 1 silver as a reward. The commoners who attended the ceremony would receive a day's worth of food. The ceremony was so grand. It was to show the righteousness of the Great Khan. Often when a person lacked something, they would want to show it to the outside world to prove that they had something. It was also a move to buy people's hearts. Whether it was giving out silver or food, although it wasn't a lot, it was mainly to show the new Khan's concern for the army and the people. This was the most important thing. Once the news was out, the entire city's 100,000 citizens soon knew about it. This was the first time many of them had heard of Ahuli's death, and they couldn't help but feel sad. They weren't sure if the new Mongol Khan would still take care of them. But more people were happy for that day's rations. In any case, it was always a good thing to get some food for free. In Siberia, where there were few fields, food was very precious. The whole city knew about this, and many people were looking forward to the new Khan's succession tomorrow. To them, although Ahuri treated them well and gave them a relatively safe living environment, a dead person was obviously not worth much compared to the benefits they could get from it. This was the pitiful nature of human nature. This was the reality of life. Under the expectant gazes of the crowd, early the next morning, Cycle changed into a dignified new robe with wide sleeves. He also held the scepter that represented his identity as the Khan. Accompanied by Busi and a group of bodyguards, he walked towards the largest square in the city. On both sides of the road, there were countless citizens waiting there. Firstly, they could watch the show, and secondly, they could drink and eat for the day. No matter how one looked at it, it was a good deal. Also in the crowd, Yangxie's intelligence personnel were also observing the surroundings. Today was also an important day for them. Wearing clean clothes and cloth armor, holding sabers, numerous Mongol cavalry came to the square to maintain order. At the same time, they were also witnesses to the new Khan's succession. As the auspicious time approached, Cycle finally appeared under the crowd. He had a smile on his face and the corners of his mouth curled upwards. That smile couldn't be hidden. Ever since he was saved by Ahuri and saw the might of the Khan, he had been dreaming about this beautiful dream. Now that it had finally come true, the excitement made him unable to control himself. If it wasn't for the fact that he had to maintain the dignity of a Khan, he would have jumped up in joy. A monkey wearing a crown. In the crowd, Guangzhen brought a few intelligence personnel to watch this scene. Unknowingly, these words came out of his mouth. Perhaps because Yang Qindong was the heavenly Khan, in the eyes of the Yangxie people who were loyal to him, the other Khans in the world were all fake, and they were all their enemies. Not far from Guangzhen and the others, Ahuri, who was wearing a black robe and covering his face, was also watching this scene. If it was someone close to him, they would be able to hear the sound of his teeth grinding against each other. It was a kind of hatred that made one want to eat flesh. Ahuri, who had fainted, had been staying in the basement that Yang Xie's intelligence department had dug out to heal his injuries. What he didn't expect was that his seemingly incurable excessive blood loss had been revived through a blood transfusion. The ancients said that the body, hair, and skin were all given to the parents, not to mention the blood in the body. How could he give it to others so easily? How could others accept it just like that? This was a life-saving grace. Compared to the people he had saved betraying him, the five-star army, the people who were most likely to become his enemy, had actually saved him. The contrast between the two made him sigh. Ahuli was a person who knew how to be grateful. Now that the five-star army had saved his life, he naturally had to repay them as a man. Thus he decided to cooperate with Guangzhen. This was not only to repay the five-star army's kindness, but also to take revenge for himself. Thus he came. As for when the basement was dug out, Ahuri didn't really care. He could see that the five-star army's thoughts about Great Crow City were not new. They must have had this idea for a long time. To think that he thought that he had the entire situation in Great Crow City under control. This was really a slap to his face. Ahuri, who was wearing a black robe, stood in the crowd and looked at Zikar's awe-inspiring appearance. He clenched his fists and waited for the most crucial moment to step out. How would Zikar know that under the protection of the crowd, he was walking step by step towards a high platform that was temporarily set up yesterday? The sacrificial items had already been prepared there. He only needed to go up under the wizard's prayer and accept the baptism. Then he would be conferred the position of the new Khan by the longevity heaven. At that time he would completely walk out of Ahuri's shadow. From today onwards, as long as Ahuri lived in the past, he wouldn't need to be afraid at all. His face was serious and his eyes were filled with anticipation. This was the first time he felt that the wizard was so long-winded. He had already been standing there for half an hour, but the other party was still singing and dancing, as if he didn't want to get to the point. How would Zikar know that the wizard had already been dealt with by Guangzhen? Now that his family was in the hands of the spies, all his actions were just to delay time and cooperate with the five-star army. Outside Great Crow City, Yang Qindong looked at the military watch on his wrist. Seeing that the hour hand was pointing to the time to make a move, he lightly pointed to Beta Persei, who was following beside him. Beta Persei, who had been waiting on horseback for a long time, immediately ordered the artillery to prepare the cannoneers. At the same time, the cavalry was ready to launch an attack. They wanted to blast open the city gate at the first moment and let the army enter the city, giving the enemy a surprise attack. This time, Yang Qindong not only wanted to defeat the Mongolian tribe, but he also wanted the Great Crow City. From the Far East region to the Siberian region, the mountains were high and the roads were dangerous. It was really difficult to travel. If they didn't establish a logistical base here in advance, then the logistical supply would be a big problem during the battle. Yang Qindong rarely let the soldiers fight on an empty stomach. In his view, this was a sign of the incompetence of the general. If the soldiers couldn't even eat their fill, how could they talk about winning the battle? Originally he was still worried about this problem. But when he understood the situation of the Great Crow City and saw that the periphery of the city was quite spectacular from afar, he had an idea. Why not continue Ahuli's efforts and build the city even higher and make it the strongest fortress of the five-star army in the Siberian region? In the future, all the food and logistical supplies transported from the Far East could be stored here. This way he would have more confidence and a higher chance of victory in the upcoming battle with the Golden Horde. With this idea, Yang Qindong would not allow the Great Crow City to be destroyed. How to quickly rush into the city and excavate the city became something that Yang Qindong had to calculate. Beta Persei let the army prepare for the attack. The commander of the new Second Army's 1st Cavalry Division, Xiao Chao, and the others also mounted their horses and put on their armor. They held light and sharp knives in their hands and were ready to attack at any time. With such an opportunity to perform well in front of Bugnam of Gojoseon, all the commanders and soldiers were holding their breaths in their hearts. They all hoped that they could be the first soldiers and the first officers to enter the city. Everything was ready except for the east wind. In the Great Crow City, the east wind finally blew at the time when the time arrived. To everyone's surprise, the first person to react was the adept who had been singing, dancing, and talking for a long time. Just when tens of thousands of people and soldiers were looking at each other, the wizard finally stopped talking, which made many people relax. Among the onlookers there was no lack of elderly people. This was not the first time they had participated in the self-titled Khans. But there had never been a time like this where the ceremony lasted for such a long time, which made them a little confused. Many people thought in their hearts, this wizard is too good at showing off. I don't know what's wrong with him, but he talked so much. Does it take so long to worship the heavens? Chapter 1405. The good thing was that it was finally over. Everyone was waiting for the shaman to speak. He wanted to use the name of Tingri to make Saikir the new Khan. Time seemed to have stopped at this moment. Everyone in the square shut their mouths at the same time. Even the children were warned by their parents to keep their mouths shut. It was as if they were afraid that crying at this moment would bring bad luck and they would be punished. Saikir and the other generals also looked at the shaman, waiting for the final judgment. Under such circumstances, the shaman finally spoke. He shouted loudly, "After I communicated with Tingri, I received a notice. Saikir." As he spoke, the shaman's gaze fell on Saikir, who was full of anticipation. He said, "Saikir is an abandoned disciple of Tingri. He forced the death of his savior. He is unfilial and has been abandoned by the heavens. Everyone has the right to punish him." What? For a moment, everyone's eyes widened. Some did not believe it. Some even dug their ears with their hands. They could not believe it. Saikir's smile froze. After he understood everything, he turned to look at Busi, who was beside him. His first instinct told him that this must be the work of this person. He had entrusted everything to this person. Now that there was a problem, who else could it be but him? In fact, he should have known that Busi was also an ambitious person. It was all his fault for being careless. Saikir's cold gaze fell on him. Busi could not help but shiver. Then he thought of something and shook his head. "It's not me. It's not me. Men, take down the shaman and kill him." "Who dares?" Seeing that Busi wanted to destroy the evidence, Saikir was not going to let it go. He shouted angrily and stopped a few Mongolian soldiers who were about to rush out. Before the matter was thoroughly investigated, Siko would not allow anything to happen to the Magi. Otherwise, he would forever be labeled as a person abandoned by the heavens. Moreover, wizards were not easy to kill. In the Mongol tribes at that time, they needed the guidance of wizards to ask for luck, to see a doctor, to build a big tent, and to look at feng shui. Such people had a strong influence among the people. If they wanted to kill a wizard now, the people who came to watch the ceremony would not agree. Sure enough, there was a commotion among the commoners. Someone shouted, "Protect the wizard." Among the commoners, there were young men who took the lead and rushed towards the wizard. They protected him tightly and did not let anyone touch him. Since the sorcerer could not be captured, Siko glared at Busi, waiting for an explanation. At this time, Bushi felt like he was suffering in silence, unable to express his bitterness. But after all, he was still a smart person. He quickly reacted and begged Shikai for mercy. "Great Khan, I don't have such thoughts. Right now, only a few people in the army listen to me. Even if you can't become the Great Khan, do you think I can? Will the army and the people agree?" This answer caused Saikel's expression to brighten, and he nodded in agreement. Ahuli had just died and the army was still unstable. If there was a problem with him, the army would be in chaos. This would not benefit Bushi at all. Perhaps this was not something he could do? And if it was not Bushi who did it, who could it be? Just as Shikai was puzzled, the wizard who was protected by the crowd spoke again. "Shikai is a man abandoned by the heavens. Everlasting heaven has sent a new heavenly Khan to save everyone. Everyone please wait and see." Bulsh *T, where did this heavenly Khan come from? Zikar immediately cursed. In the eyes of the Mongols, the earliest heavenly Khan was the Tang king, Li Shimin, who dealt a heavy blow to their ancestors. In their hearts, the only one who could truly hold the position was one of their ancestors, the invincible Genghis Khan, who killed people like flies. Whether it was the former or the latter, they had died many years ago. How could there be any title of heavenly Khan? Not only Shikai but even the ordinary people were puzzled. Could this wizard really be spouting nonsense here? Just as everyone was puzzled and Shikai was about to counterattack. If he overthrew this wizard, it would be equivalent to overthrowing what this wizard had said before. In this way, his identity as a man abandoned by the heavens could not be established. The wizard spoke again. "The everlasting heaven has sent down a heavenly Khan. Naturally there will be a sign. Next there will be thunder rolling. Everyone can only wait and see." Thunder rolling? After hearing this, almost 9 out of 10 people could not help but look up at the sky. It had to be said that the weather Bushi had chosen for this auspicious day was not bad. Under the clear sky, there was not a single dark cloud, and there was not even the slightest hint of rain. Ha ha ha. After looking up at the sky, many people began to laugh maniacally. At this time, more people began to think that this wizard was indeed a little crazy and began to make irresponsible remarks. Shikai was also laughing at the sky. The wizard's words made him feel much more relaxed. The higher such a person jumped, the happier he would be. This would only prove that this wizard was unreliable and that his words could not be trusted. In this way there was no need for him to say anything. He was already innocent. However, this laughter came to an abrupt stop. Because at this moment, a rumbling sound came from the horizon. Following that, the earth seemed to tremble, and some people who could not stand still began to stagger. At the same time, more people opened their eyes wide. When they looked at the wizard, their eyes were filled with deep respect and fear. Were wizards so powerful? Could they really communicate with the everlasting heaven? Many of the people from the White Russian tribe who came here originally did not believe in wizards, but now they could not help but believe in the truth. The rumbling sound was of course not thunder rolling. Couldn't you see that the sky was still incomparably blue? This sound was made by the cannons of the 5-star army. Under the coordination of the cannons from the outside and the inside, the timing of the attack was accurate, resulting in the greatest effect. At this moment, the sound of the cannons continued. The east gate of the Great Raven City had been completely blown open. Under the gate, countless armored new Second Army cavalry rushed into the city. The wizard stood among the crowd, enjoying the worship of the crowd. However, he was still in a daze. He only said these words because his family was controlled by Wang Guang. For their safety, he had no choice but to say these words. Even before this, he was already prepared to be despised by the crowd. This was because he did not believe that the everlasting heaven would send down any lightning punishment. If even he did not believe it, how could he convince others? He was even prepared to end his career. With his death, he could ensure the safety of his family, so it was worth it. He only hoped that the one called Wang Guang would do as he said. However, who would have thought that when he said those words according to Wang Guang's plan, there would actually be a lightning punishment? Could it be that Wang Guang was the one who could communicate with the heavens? Not only was the wizard full of questions, but Ahu, who had been hiding in the crowd, was also dumbfounded. He also had a face full of doubts. What was going on? Was this Magus really that powerful? If he had known this earlier, he would have treated him as an important guest. Then, there would not be so many worries in the Great Raven City. It's your turn. Among the crowd, the calmest was Wang Guang and a group of secret agents. They had already known what was going to happen and had calculated everything. Now that everything was normal, he came to Ahuri's side and reminded him. Oh. With this reminder, Ahu remembered that he still had a mission. With the help of a few secret agents, he squeezed through the crowd and walked up to the high platform. Everyone was still in a state of shock, so no one noticed the movements of the black-robed man. It was only when Ahuli walked up to the stage and appeared beside Shikai, that some of the bodyguards noticed. Someone shouted, "Who are you? Why aren't you backing down? You're just someone who has been abandoned by the heavens. What's there to be proud of?" Ahu, who had once led 20,000 soldiers, would not be frightened by the shouts of a few soldiers. After a cold snort, he took off his black robe and revealed his original appearance. It's the Great Khan. The bodyguards had all seen Ahuli before. After recognizing his identity, they still greeted him as they used to. That's right, it's this Khan. Ahu replied in a deep voice. He suddenly turned to look at the commoners in the square and shouted, I'm Ahu. I didn't die. This Khan has returned. It's the Great Khan. Someone among the commoners took the lead and shouted, then knelt on the ground. With this leader, the other commoners also knelt on the ground out of habit. From this, it could be seen that Ahu's efforts were not in vain. At least he still had a lot of support among the commoners. Ahu's sudden appearance caused the commoners to kneel. At the same time, it also caused Cicero and Busi to feel fear. A person who was already dead in their eyes had suddenly appeared in front of them. How could they not be shocked, agitated, or even terrified? The commoners all knelt down, and many Mongol soldiers also knelt on the ground. They were all low-level soldiers and did not know about the struggle between the higher-ups. In their eyes, many people were still used to recognizing Ahu as the Great Khan. The situation suddenly went out of control, and Cicero's brows furrowed. At this moment, Ahuli opened his mouth. First, he pointed his finger at Cycle, then said in a clear voice, "This is a despicable person. This Khan saved his life and gave him a new lease of life, but he actually colluded with others to harm this Khan, forcing me to go into hiding due to my serious injuries. This person has committed a heinous crime. The shamans were right when they said that he was abandoned by the heavens." Ahu stood out and accused, causing the already chaotic square to become even more chaotic. Chapter 1406. Since ancient times, a mountain could not accommodate two tigers. Ahuli was not dead, so Saikar's position as the Khan was not rightful. Adding on the fact that the sorcerer's words had been abandoned by the heavens, Saikar's expression was extremely ugly, and his face was extremely pale. Even if he was beaten to death, he would never have thought that not only was Ahuli not dead, but he was also alive and kicking in front of him. Moreover, he had appeared just as he was about to inherit the throne. All of this was too much of a coincidence. It could be said that his opponent had appeared at the most inappropriate time. This had completely ruined his previous plan, and Saikar did not know how to react. He could only stand there and tremble, not knowing whether it was from fear or anger. On the other hand, Bushi was still able to maintain a clear head. Although this series of events had greatly exceeded his expectations, he was not the one who saw it. As a bystander, he had a clear view of the situation. When he looked at Ahuli, killing intent appeared in his eyes. In his opinion, although the situation was a bit complicated, it was all because of Ahuli's appearance. As long as Ahuli died, no one would be a match for Saikar, and there would be no reason for him to take the throne. As for the sorcerer's words, he only needed to accuse him of being Ahuli's accomplice and find a reputable sorcerer to refute the rumors. In the face of absolute power, even if the commoners had their own opinions, they would not dare to speak carelessly in order to protect themselves. After making up his mind, Bushi quietly signaled to the soldiers behind him to take action. He then stepped forward, blocking in front of Saikar as he shouted at Ahuli, "Ahuli, you traitor of the Mongol race! You have already surrendered to the Russians. Your so-called love for the people is just an excuse. You want the army to have no food to eat so that we can lose our ability to fight. That way we can surrender to the Russian masters. I never thought that you would do such a sinister thing, but you still did it. Great Khan Saikar was merciful and did not kill you. He only let you go, but you still dare to provoke us. Do you really think we won't dare to kill you? What did it mean to be the guilty party suing the victim? What did it mean to distort the truth? What did it mean to make something out of nothing? What was the meaning of, if you have a mind to condemn someone, you can always find some excuse to condemn him?" At this moment, Ahuli knew everything. He had never looked at Bushi so seriously before. It was only at this moment that he realized that Bushi was a talent who could talk nonsense with his eyes wide open. If such a person were to be sent as an envoy, the effect would be unimaginable. Ahuli wasn't the only one who was shocked. Many others were also looking at this scene in shock. However, not all of them knew that this was a lie. Instead, they were considering the credibility of this matter. Bushi was powerful because his words were both true and false. For example, it was true that he loved the people and treated the army harshly. Because of this, many people believed in this saying. If that was the case, then everything would be easy to explain. Presumably, even the wizard was one of Ahuri's people. Everything that happened just now must have been arranged by them. He had actually managed to turn the situation around. It was no wonder that Ahuli valued him so much. After a while, Saikar finally recovered. Now that he had come to this point, he had no way out. Otherwise, death would be the only thing that awaited him. Saikar, who couldn't retreat anymore, used Bushi's words to shout loudly, "That's right, Ahuli. I once spared your life out of kindness, but I didn't expect you to be so unrepentant. You colluded with the wizard to fool everyone. Since that's the case, I can't let you live anymore. Men, take him down." Bushi's personal guards, who were already prepared, drew their swords and rushed forward after receiving the order. Their eyes were fierce, and they looked like they would kill anyone who stood in their way. If it was in the suburbs or a spacious place, there would be nowhere to hide in the face of these ferocious personal guards. However, this was a crowded square. The result was completely different. At this moment, everyone was huddled together. There was nowhere to hide even if he wanted to. Of course, Ahuli couldn't dodge, and it was even more difficult for those personal guards to get close to him. Guang, who had already received Yang Qindong's order to protect Ahuli, had also made various plans. Now that someone wanted to get close to Ahuli without waiting for his order, the spies he had arranged in the crowd began to move. What are they doing? They haven't even explained the situation clearly, and they want to take him down. Are they trying to silence him? I think they're trying to silence him. This is a sign of guilt. What kind of person is Ahuli? He treats the people so well. How could he do something bad to them? They're obviously jealous. Come everyone, let's protect Ahuli. Isn't it better to talk things out face to face? Within the crowd, voices rang out one after another. These were all words that Wang Guang had arranged beforehand. Now, with their lead, Some of the commoners who did not know the truth also joined in the commotion and were not afraid of things blowing up. For a moment, it was even more difficult for those personal guards to get close to Ahuli. The situation was so chaotic that Shikir and Bushi didn't expect it to be like this. Ahuli, who was being protected by the crowd, was slowly moving out. Once he escaped, there would be two voices in the Great Crow City. This was definitely not what they wanted to see. After they looked at each other, they saw a fierce look in each other's eyes. Let's kill them. Sikong sighed and pretended to be forced to do so. Okay. Bushi was waiting for this sentence. In troubled times, severe punishment was needed. In the face of chaos, the most effective way was to kill until the opponent surrendered, until there were no opponents left. Men, call the archers and prepare to shoot. Bushi's face also flashed with killing intent. For his own glory and wealth, he treated these people as enemies. Originally, 2,000 cavalrymen were sent to the square to maintain order. As soon as the order was given, the cavalrymen quickly gathered and mounted their horses. Their bows were drawn and their killing intent was overwhelming. Not good, they're going to kill indiscriminately. Everyone be careful. Wang Guang, who was in the crowd, noticed this scene and hurriedly shouted out. He then lowered his body as much as possible and hid among the Mongolian and White Russian people. At the same time, his eyes were filled with anxiety, and he would occasionally look into the distance. He wanted to wait for Bugnam of Gojoseon to arrive with the main force. The new Second Army's 1st Cavalry Division's commander, Chow Chow, was the first to charge into the Great Crow City. There was a sudden explosion, and when the east gate was blasted open, many of the Mongol soldiers were still standing there in a daze. They simply couldn't understand why the perfectly fine city gate would suddenly break, and where the loud noise came from. Reality soon gave them the answer. The ground began to tremble and the sounds of killing could be heard. A black whirlwind came from afar. A 5-star flag fluttering in the wind entered the eyes of the Mongol soldiers guarding the city. It's the enemy, it's the Han cavalry. On the city wall, a sharp-eyed soldier saw this scene and shouted out in fear. Where did the enemy come from? Where did the enemy come from? A Chiliarch who was guarding the city hurriedly climbed up and looked into the distance. Then he said in shock, "No, that's impossible. How could there be so many enemies here? Did they fall from the sky?" It was no wonder that this Chiliarch was so shocked. This place had just been developed, and not only were the roads difficult to travel, it was also difficult for the army to transport supplies. They really couldn't think of anyone who would attack them at this time, as this didn't fit with the rules of the past. The so-called rules were meant to be broken. Before the 5-star army set out, they had prepared a large amount of biscuits, instant noodles, canned ham, bread and other things. Not only did these things not take up much space, but they could also fill their stomachs, greatly solving the problem of logistics. Therefore, things that were impossible in the eyes of others were possible in the eyes of the 5-star army soldiers. Under the shocked gazes of the Mongolians, the 5-star army charged into the city. After the thick city gates were destroyed by the cannonballs, the 5-star army charged into the city, breaking the iron rule that only the Mongolian cavalry could attack Seoul, and the Han cavalry could only defend. With the reward of military merits, all the 5-star cavalry soldiers led the charge. They were like an unstoppable black whirlwind that no one could stop as they charged into the city. From time to time, they would even take out their bows and shoot at the Mongolian cavalry, killing people along the way. No one could stop them and they were invincible. Division Commander Chow Chow led the 1st Cavalry Division and charged into the city at lightning speed. Before the Mongolian cavalrymen could understand what was going on, they were already heading towards the square in the city. Before they set out, Division Commander Chow had already looked at the map of the city, and he was very clear about his destination. After the 1st Cavalry Division, the other 3 divisions of the new Second Army also charged into the city. The Mongolian cavalry did not even have time to report, and they had already charged into the city, arriving at the city walls and taking control of the situation. Those who resist will be killed, those who surrender will live. The moment the 5-star army cavalry appeared, their battle cries shook the city. Following which, arrows flew in all directions, and the Mongolian soldiers who wanted to resist were killed before they could even find their war horses. More and more 5-star army soldiers entered the city, and more arrows threatened the lives of the Mongolian soldiers. In just 15 minutes, at least 500 Mongolian soldiers were killed, and those who were still alive were shocked by the unstoppable momentum of the 5-star army. Finally, some of them threw down their weapons and chose to kneel on the ground and surrender. These Mongol soldiers had spent most of their time in the Great Crow City, and their ferocious side had already been smoothed out. Facing the valiant soldiers of the five-star army, who were completely unprepared, how could they be a match for them? Chapter 1407. Entering from the east gate, the sound of iron hooves stomping on the ground spread out. On the streets, some of the citizens who didn't attend the ceremony of the Great Khan fell to their knees in fear when they saw the five-star army's cavalry, dressed in black armor and riding on tall horses. Because the Mongol cavalry was too poor, their clothing was not uniform and most of them wore cloth armor, unlike the five-star army who wore standard armor. When the cavalry passed by, the trembling commoners knelt on the ground, trembling all over. They did not know what fate awaited them. On the square, there were already hundreds of Mongolian cavalry raising their bows and arrows. Under Percy's orders, the arrows shot out and landed on the crowd in front of them. In an instant, many of the civilians who had nowhere to hide were hit by the arrows and started to bleed. Chaos ensued. No one had thought that watching the ceremony of the Great Khan would be life-threatening. In order to protect their lives, or perhaps it was out of instinct, the commoners fled in all directions. They did not know where was safe, but they knew that standing in the same place was dangerous. Many of the commoners who fled in all directions ran towards the east gate. Their homes were there and they were escaping back to their homes. However, very quickly those people turned back and ran towards the square at an even faster speed. What's going on? Suddenly, so many commoners ran back, and all of them revealed even more terrified expressions than before. When this scene fell into Cycle's eyes, he had a bad feeling. Rumble, rumble. The sound of horse hooves hitting the ground could finally be heard as they got closer and closer. It reached the square and reached the ears of the Mongolian soldiers. To the veterans, this sound was not unfamiliar. Cycle and Bushy's eyes were filled with suspicion. They did not order the other cavalry to come to the square, so who did it? Could it be him? At the same time, the two of them thought of Ahuli. After all, only this former Great Khan had the ability to mobilize a cavalry army. However, they had already replaced the generals with their own confidants, so who would have the guts to do this? At this moment, they did not think that there would be enemies charging into the city. Perhaps it was because they had always been the ones looking for trouble, and no one had taken the initiative to attack them, so their vigilance had been lowered to the lowest. How could such an army not be defeated? Just as the two of them looked towards the east in fear, thinking about which general would come, and whether or not they would be able to use them, the five-star army finally appeared in the distance. Black armor, cavalry swords that shone under the sun, as well as the unforgettable flag of the five-star army. When Cycle and Bushy saw it, their expressions changed and they said in unison, "It's the five-star army." The five-star army, they had fought with them before. It was the third army led by Wuxia. A few years ago they had entered Siberia through the Far East region, but they quickly entered the territory of the Golden Horde. Cycle had fought with them before and lost. Fortunately, Wuxia didn't intend to stay for long. Otherwise, the most powerful force in Siberia would have already changed hands. Even so, that battle had left a deep impression on Cycle. The enemy's discipline was strict, and they attacked and defended well. Their soldiers were brave, and even the most elite Mongol cavalry would not be much stronger than them. He had once rejoiced that the five-star army did not intend to stay, but now they had appeared again and in such a silent manner. In Cycle's eyes, not only was there shock, there was also deep fear. How could it be them? Bushy recognized the other party and thought of something. His original calmness was finally replaced by panic. He was not afraid when the wizard said that he was the son of heaven, and he was not afraid when Ahuli appeared. Because in his eyes, these people could be killed at any time. But now that the five-star army had appeared, he finally felt fear. Especially when he saw them enter the city, the fear grew even stronger. Great Khan. Bushy turned around and asked for Cycle's opinion. He wanted to gain some confidence from Cycle. But he was destined to be disappointed. Cycle's situation was not much better than his, and there was also deep fear in his eyes. After hearing Bushy's call, he swallowed his saliva and said, "It's the five-star army. How did they enter the city? I'm afraid we can't beat them." Then should we retreat? Block had the same idea. Although he was also curious about why the other party appeared in the Great Raven City, and what the soldiers guarding the gate were doing, compared to these questions, preserving their lives was more important. Cycle and Bushy saw that the situation was not good, so they prepared to escape. But Wang Guang, who had been watching their every move, began to move. He had already heard the sound of horse hooves and knew that the main force of the army had arrived. His courage was immediately boosted and he immediately gave the order to attack. Although the security bureau only had 20 people, Some of them had to be sent to protect Ahuli, so they could only mobilize 20 people. But they were still not afraid and quickly approached Cycle and Bushi while the crowd was retreating. Amidst the chaos, no one noticed these 20 people. Only when they formed a circle and began to close in did they stand out. First, a group of personal guards shouted for the newcomers to stop. Then, swords and sabers clashed together. As the team leader, Wang Guang had an epic-making grenade on him. He had prepared it early in the morning just in case he needed it. And this grenade was also something he had painstakingly brought from the headquarters, and he had always regarded it as a treasure. But now he could not care less. Seeing the guards surrounding him and blocking his team's path, he gritted his teeth, pulled out the grenade from his waist and threw it forward. The grenade drew a beautiful arc in the air, and then fell 3 feet away from Cycle and Bushi. Although it was not very accurate, following the loud explosion, the 2 generals who had just mounted their horses were shocked by the loud explosion. Their horses also neighed and went crazy. Their horses did not listen to their commands, and after the 2 generals calmed down, they tried a few times, but could not get on their horses. At this time, the vanguard cavalry of the 5-star army finally began to approach. Commander Qiao Qiao was still far away, but he had already knocked his bow. When he saw the scene of fighting, he did not hesitate to shoot. Immediately, an arrow pierced through a Mongolian soldier's back, and his body trembled as he fell to the ground. Shio shio shio. Shio shio shio. A wave of arrows arrived. Not only were the Mongolian guards dealt with, but even the main generals, Cycle and Bushi, were not much better off and were hit by arrows. Although it was not fatal, their movements were restricted, and they could not escape. After throwing the grenade, Wang Guang, who had fallen to the ground, saw the main army arrive. A smile finally appeared on his face. He immediately got up, took out a waist plate from his waist and shouted, "I am the team leader of the security bureau stationed in Siberia, Wang Guang. The 2 over there are the Mongolian guards, Cycle and Bushi. Quickly take them down." As his voice rang out, a group of 5-star army cavalry passed by him, and surrounded Cycle and Bushi, who were still howling in pain after being hit by the arrows. At the same time, a portion of the cavalry charged towards the thousands of Mongolian cavalry on the square. As the number of cavalry from the 5-star army increased, the overall situation was settled. Cycle and Bushi were injured and captured. Ahuli followed his agreement with Wang Guang and brought Commander Qiao Qiao to peacefully reclaim the other 3 city gates. At this point, the new Second Army had taken down the entire Great Crow City with less than 100 casualties, including the 6 members of the Security Bureau who had died. The 5-star army entered the city, but they did not disturb the residents. Apart from a few more cavalry patrolling the streets, everything seemed normal. Even the more daring merchants and peddlers in the city who came out to set up their stalls were surprised to find that no one stopped or obstructed them. The Great Crow City was not the first city that the 5-star army had taken down, and it would not be the last city that they took down. As for what to do after entering a city, it could be said that they were very experienced. Because the 5-star army did not cause trouble in the city, the law and order of the Great Crow City was quickly restored. When Yang Qindong and the new Second Army entered the city, there were already many residents walking on the streets. Not bad, the residents here are very brave. Under the tight protection of a group of Black Knight Dragon Guards, Yang Qindong, who was riding a white dragon, traveled through the city. He couldn't help but sigh as he looked at the scene before him. Yes. Compared to the fear that we brought to them, they are more afraid of not having food to eat. The commander of the new Second Army said. Half of his blood was Mongolian, and he was used to being cold and hungry since young. He knew that in the eyes of the poor, sometimes life was not the most important thing. Being able to eat was more important. Of course, Yang Qindong understood the meaning of these words. He could not help but sigh. Yes, there are many people in this world who have worked hard for a long time, but still have no food to eat. However, before long they will be free and become Yangxia citizens. As long as they are not too lazy, they will not starve. When speaking of this matter, Yang Qindong felt a little proud. After all, because of his arrival, many residents who would have starved to death had food to eat and were able to survive. This was a matter of great merit. Chapter 1408. Shibi was also influenced by Yang Qindong. He nodded and said, "Yes, to be able to join the Yangxia is the good fortune of these people." This was not flattery. It was the truest feeling he had after so many years. Back then he had almost starved to death. But now, what he ate, what he wore, and what he lived in, which part of it was not satisfactory. It was because of this truest feeling that he wanted more Mongols to be like him. At least they would not have to worry about food anymore. Hearing Shibi's sigh, Yang Qindong had a thought and said, Commander Shibi has the heart of a bodhisattva. Since that is the case, I will leave the matter of persuading the army and the people to you. Is there a problem? Please open the granary and release the grain. Shibi cupped his fist as if he was prepared. Proved. Yang Qindong did not even frown. He knew better than anyone that agriculture was the foundation of a country. However, he also knew that without commerce one would not be rich. Therefore, he had never relied on agriculture to make a fortune. He was also open to all aspects of agriculture. Not only did he encourage the people to farm, but he also set a protective price to prevent the price of grain from falling during good harvests. With the help of various policies, Yang Xie had an unimaginable amount of grain. As long as he needed it, there would be an endless supply of grain from the 3 eastern provinces to the Far East and Siberia. Although at least 50% of the grain would be consumed along the way, Yang Qindong did not care about these losses. Just like when he came from the Far East, a few large grain transport teams also left the city. It would not be long before they arrived at Great Raven City to solve the grain problem. On behalf of the people, I thank the king. Shibi cupped his fist and bowed solemnly. Then he left with the guards. Yang Qindong was accompanied by leader Wang Guang from the security bureau to his residence in the city. Guang had made a great military contribution this time. Not only had he saved Ahuli Khan, but he had also left behind the 2 main culprits, Zikar and Busi. Hearing that he had wasted a grenade because of this, Yang Qindong laughed and said to Beta Persei, when group leader Wang leaves, give him 2 boxes of grenades. Alright, give him a gun. Don't forget. Yes, young master, Beta Persei agreed with a chuckle. Wang's face was naturally filled with gratitude. When he thought about how he could finally wear a spear and how it was personally given to him by the 6th young master, how glorious it was, he couldn't stop smiling. From Wang Guang, Yang Qindong had a clearer understanding of the situation in Great Wu City. Oh, according to you, Ahuli is a talent. Then I'd like to meet him. Group leader Wang, please make the arrangements. Yes. Wang immediately gave a military salute, then waved his hand to call over a team member and gave him a few instructions. Yang Qindong's residence in Great Wu City was where Ahuli used to live. The area was not small and there were 5 courtyards. However, the things inside were too simple and crude. It could be seen that this Mongolian tribe was really poor. Even the Khan's living conditions were like this. While he was admiring the courtyard that didn't have many things, Ahuli was brought to the courtyard by the Black Cavalry. When Yang Qindong turned his head, the first thing he exclaimed was that Ahuli was a tiger general. He was almost 8 feet tall and his arms were long. It was just that he didn't know if his arms reached his knees. Sinner General Ahuli greets King Wunan of Damyang. He had already heard a lot about Yang Qindong's deeds from Guang. As soon as he saw him, he willingly knelt on the ground. The stronger one was, the more they admired the strong. Clearly in Ahuli's eyes, Yang Qindong was the strongest of the strong. When he saw Ahuli standing upright even though he was kneeling, and was even taller than some people who were squatting, Yang Qindong couldn't help but sigh. It was a waste not to lead troops with this kind of figure. Yes, you are Ahuli, the Khan of this Mongolian tribe? Bugnam of Gojoseon, don't humiliate Sinner General. In your eyes, how could I dare to be called Khan? Ahuli had already heard from Guang that the King Wunan of Damyang in front of him had the title of Heavenly Khan. It was he who led the army to defeat the Wala and the Tartar Mongol branch. Speaking of which, who knew how much stronger they were? In the eyes of such people, his position as the great Khan looked so laughable. Yang Qindong admired Ahuli's ability to read the situation. It was because of this that he asked, Ahuli, if this king allows you to lead troops to expand your territory, would you be willing? Ahuli, who was kneeling on the ground, suddenly raised his head. His eyes widened in disbelief as he said, Bugnam of Gojoseon allows me to lead troops, but I am a Sinner General. What about Sinner General? I won't hide it from you. At least half of the 5-star army is made up of Sinner Generals. However, ever since they joined the army their performance has improved. Now the highest is already a commander. That's right, he also has half of your Mongolian bloodline. This person is in the city. If you have the chance you can go and talk to him. Yang Qindong thought of parting ways and said with a smile. Hearing that there was someone like him, Ahuli was immediately interested. Bugnam of Gojoseon, the Sinner General wants to meet with this person and talk to him before making a decision. Is that possible? Of course. Men, take him to parting ways. Tell him that this king said so. Tell Commander Parting to tell him everything he knows. Yang Qindong did not intend to force a huli to become a commander. A forcibly picked melon would not be sweet. If a huli still wanted to govern a place after meeting parting ways, then he would let him leave the army and start as a small official. The Yang faction had developed to this point, and both the number of generals and civil officials had greatly increased. Although with the expansion of the territory, it was still somewhat insufficient, but it was no longer as strained as before. The Great Raven City was taken down by Yang Qindong with the smallest price. This was also because of Yunji meeting. On the other hand, in Wuxia City to the north, Tianhu's first cavalry army couldn't find a suitable opportunity, so they set up their formation and engaged in a bloody battle with Hurahan. Last year, Hulahan led 30,000 iron cavalry into the Far East region and took advantage of the chaos to enter All City. However, when Yang Qindong led his army to All City, they suffered several defeats in succession. Even great General Akmu died in battle. In the end, not only did they lose All City, they only brought back 10,000 iron cavalry. With their strength greatly reduced, they became much more obedient. After returning to All City, they began to recruit new soldiers. They were waiting for the time when they were strong enough to take revenge. During this time, he was afraid that someone would cause trouble for him, so he sent a messenger to the Great Raven City to instigate a rebellion. This was also a way to weaken the enemy's strength. Hulahan was not like a huli. He did not know how to prioritize the common people. In his opinion, the common people would always be common people. They were only fit to be his slaves, his soldiers, and die for him. His thinking was not right, so the treatment of soldiers was very poor. As a result, the expansion of his army was not very smooth. After half a year, he finally recruited 5,000 soldiers with great difficulty. Before he could even gather enough war horses for these 5,000 new soldiers, the world's #1 cavalry army suddenly appeared. When he found out that the 5-star army was coming, Hulahan did not put up any resistance out of instinct. Under the protection of the new General Yilahan, he led 5,000 of the most elite cavalry to escape. His fighting ability was average, but his escaping ability was top-notch. Afraid of being caught, Hulahan escaped with a light carriage. His speed was not something that Tianhu could catch up to. In the end, he could only watch as Hulahan escaped from his sight. Without the protection of the Great Khan, the Mongolian army was nothing more than a pile of loose sand. When Tianhu took out the 5 cannons that accompanied the army and began to bombard the city gate, there was a loud explosion accompanied by cries and screams. The city gate was opened and the city was in chaos. Different from the firearms of this era, they only used solid bullets. Compared to the bombs used by the 5-star army, the difference was too great. The moment the cannons exploded, many things were already decided. When the cannons blew open the city gate, it also destroyed the morale of the Mongolian soldiers. The 5-star army's cavalry was like a ferocious tiger descending from the mountain as they neatly entered the city. This allowed the soldiers and commoners in the city to see what a true elite was. After seeing the world's #1 cavalry army in high spirits and well-equipped, the commoners who originally did not have a good impression of Hulahan completely gave up on resisting. In their eyes, no matter how bad their lives were, could it be worse than having Hulahan as their great Khan? Tianhu was Yang Qindong's student, and could be considered an all-rounder. He knew that it was easier to conquer a country than to defend it. After taking over the city, he sent a telegram to Qin Bo in the Far East, asking him to send people to transport military supplies and send local officials to take over the city. At the same time, he calmed the hearts of the commoners and did the same thing as Yang Qindong, opening up the granaries to the commoners. The two armies unexpectedly descended from the sky, and the Siberian region quickly became part of the Yangtze's territory. A month later, this matter finally reached the ears of the Golden Horde and the Rasi principalities. After Hulahan escaped, the first person he sought refuge with was the great Khan of the Golden Horde, Uluhe Mahama. Genghis Khan's descendants had established 4 Khanates, namely the Golden Horde, also known as the Kipchak Khanate, the Chagatai Khanate, the Ajadai Khanate, and the Ili Khanate. The Golden Horde was conquered by Genghis Khan's eldest son, Joki, and grandson. After Genghis Khan's death, only his direct descendants, namely Joki, Chagatai, Ajadai, and Talyui's descendants, were known as the Golden Horde, and had the right to inherit the Khanate's throne. After Talyui's son, Monk, became the great Khan of the Mongols, the range was further narrowed down to Talyui's descendants. The Yuan dynasty emperors and the Ming dynasty Khans such as Dayan Khan, all came from this line. Chapter 1409. In 1242, Bata suddenly retreated back to Russia and led his army to launch the Second Mongol Western Expedition. The Mongol Western Expedition quickly conquered the vast lands of Eastern Europe and the Caucasus. After the Western Expedition, Batu established the city of Batasalai in the north of Astrakhan. The Volga River became the economic and political center of the Golden Horde. It had been more than 200 years since the Mongols first established themselves in Russia. Over the past 200 years, the resistance in Russia had become more and more intense. Even if Yang Qindong hadn't appeared, they would have become independent in the near future. However, with the arrival of Yang Qindong, history had to be rewritten. Uluhay Mahama was the current Great Khan of the Golden Horde. He was the 39th monarch of the Golden Horde. He was the true commander of the Mongols in this vast region. Hulahan brought 5,000 elite cavalry to join the Golden Horde. Mahama took them under his wing based on the principle of strength in numbers. However, his son Bora objected to this. Mahama was almost 60 years old. His son Bora had already grown up. Not only that, but his grandson Hanyad Ali would also become a general who could mount a horse and fight in battle. It was this inheritance that allowed his family to sit on the Great Khan's throne for so long. Bora, who had long been listed as the successor, objected. Even Mahama had to take this seriously. The father and son discussed the issue of Hulahan in the palace of Salai. "Father, I object to accepting Hulahan." Bora's voice was loud and clear. He was tall and strong and his voice was full of energy. In contrast, Mahama wore a tiger skin draped over his shoulders. He leaned back on his dragon throne and said calmly, "Reason?" Bora, who was used to his father's way of speaking, immediately said, "Father, Hulahan offended the 5-star army. This time he only brought 5,000 cavalry. If we give up on our friendship with General Wusheng because of them, we will lose the big picture for the small." The Wusheng Bola spoke of was the commander of the 5-star army's 3rd army, Wusheng, who had arrived in this area a few years ago. When Wusheng first arrived, he was ostracized by the local forces. Not only the Mongol soldiers, but even the White Russian soldiers were not friendly to them. It wasn't until he displayed his strength, fought a few tough battles, and achieved victory that he finally received everyone's recognition. But even so, due to the short time they had spent in the Golden Horde and the long journey, it was difficult for them to obtain the support of the Yangxia headquarters. Their development was also very slow. Now, they had only established New Xia City in the northern part of the Golden Horde, and their range of activities was limited to that area. The Golden Horde's territory was a barren land to begin with, and they also had some military strength. For the Golden Horde, the gains from such a long expedition were indeed very limited, so they had been tolerating their existence. But no matter what, it was still a decent military force. Furthermore, New Xia City was not far from the Ras Duchy's territory, making it a target for the Golden Horde to rope in. They wanted to use Wusheng to suppress the Ras Duchy, which would make it easier for them to attack their opponents. This also made Wusheng's position in the 3rd Army higher, making it easier for him to find a way to survive in the cracks between the two sides. This was one of the Golden Horde's military strategies against external forces, and it was also recognized by everyone. But now, they had to make an enemy out of Wusheng for the sake of 5,000 Mongol soldiers. No matter how you looked at it, it was not worth it. Bora had doubts in his heart. Mahama slowly opened his eyes. "What's wrong? You can't hold it in anymore?" "Father, it's not that I can't hold it in. It's that your son thinks that we will lose the big picture for the small." Bora's eyes were wide open, his face full of dissatisfaction. Looking at his somewhat childish son, Mahama knew that some things had to be made clear. He simply asked, "Father, let me ask you. Who is our biggest enemy right now?" "Of course it's the Ras Duchy." Bora didn't know why he would ask such a question. Even a 3-year-old child in the Horde would know this. "That's right." Mahama nodded. "In recent years, our warriors have been arrogant, greedy, and unambitious. They have long since lost the courage and bravery of their ancestors. On the other hand, the Ras Duchy, under the leadership of the Grand Duke of Blindness, Vasily II's nickname, has become stronger and stronger. Although they are not as strong as us, the gap between us will slowly shrink. If this continues, there will come a day when we will not be their match. They will be our greatest enemy." Bora agreed with this point. He had been working hard for this. At least his Mongol branch had changed. They had begun to practice horsemanship and strengthen themselves. But the Golden Horde wasn't just under their control. There were other branches that were also quite powerful. Their lack of effort, however, was a source of great indignation to Bolar. He always thought that if all the Mongol soldiers had followed his example, it would not be impossible for them to restore the glory of their ancestors to their former glory. Bora nodded in agreement. Mahama smiled and said, "Now that we know who our biggest enemy is, what do you think we should do now that a third force has appeared? Should we pull one of them over and fight the other? Or should we watch the other two fight while we reap the benefits?" "Of course we should reap the benefits," Bora answered instinctively without hesitation. After saying this, he suddenly shut his mouth. Then he thought of something and said, "Father, do you mean to let Wu Sheng and the Ras dukedom fight while we watch from the sidelines?" Mahama was very pleased that his son understood his meaning so quickly. With such a son, at least one day when he grew old, he could finally leave in peace. "That's right. That's what my father thinks. However, we can't just stand by and do nothing. I'm afraid that the blind Grand Duke won't agree to this either. Therefore we still have to send out our troops. However, we have to see how we can achieve the greatest victory with the least cost." "Father, I understand now. You mean to say that we should first cooperate with the Ras dukedom to deal with Wu Sheng's army while they are closer to each other. That way we can watch them fight and then reap the benefits, right?" Bowler said, "Father, I understand now. What you mean is that we should first cooperate with the Ras dukedom to deal with Wu Sheng's army." "Well said. That's exactly what Father means. Think about it. Since we are already going to war with Wu Sheng, why don't we accept Hulahin's surrender? He has 5,000 elite cavalry." Mahama chuckled. Bora finally understood Mahama's meaning. Excitement appeared on his face. Was the war finally about to begin? He, as a hero, could finally be put to use. This was something he had been looking forward to for a long time. But then he thought of something and said worriedly, "Father, how many men does Wu Sheng have? Can they be a match for the Ras Duchy's army?" "Of course they can't, but didn't Hulahin say that? King Wunan of Damyang is here. With them we should have the strength to fight." Mahama said as if he was giving advice. "King Wunan of Damyang? Those two-legged sheep?" When Bora said this, a trace of disdain appeared in his eyes. Two-legged sheep was a term that the Mongol cavalry used to call the weak Han Chinese. In their eyes, the Han Chinese were too weak and they were like sheep that could be taken at any time. The only difference was that they lacked two legs. In other words, it was the same reason that some people in history called the Han Chinese the sick man of East Asia. No. Mahama shook his head and said, "These two-legged sheep are very different. They are very good at war. The Wara and Tatar tribes have been defeated by them. Moreover, this King Wunan of Damyang is very good at scheming and bewitching people. According to Hulahin, the enemy's army is not made up of Han Chinese. They have us Mongols and many other races. There is even a White Russian division with over 20,000 men. He is just like our ancestors, full of ambition." Speaking of this, Mahama seemed to have recalled something and a look of yearning appeared on his face. Bora, on the other hand, fell into deep thought. It could be said that he understood his father very well. This Wunan Wang of the great Ming dynasty could be valued by his father so much. It could be seen that he was not an ordinary person. However, the more it was like this, the more he wanted to meet this person. He did not believe that a two-legged sheep could go against the heavens. Bora was convinced by his father, and the matter of Hulahin's defection became a matter of course. The next step was to send a message to the Ras duchies, stating that they detested General Wu Sheng and the Han army in Wuxia city. This was originally their world, and even if there was a battle, it should be decided between them, not an outsider. In addition, there was news that the master behind Wu Sheng, King Wunan of Damyang, had led an army from afar. In order to prevent them from becoming stronger after meeting, it was time to eliminate this armed force. The capital of the Rasi principalities. Vasily II, the Grand Duke of Moscow. Because he was blinded, his vision was extremely limited, and he was nicknamed the Grand Duke of Blindness. During Vasily II's reign, almost all the independent feudal territories within the Grand Duchy of Moscow were abolished. The independence of the republican city-states of Novgorod, Vyatka, and Pskov was weakened. History said that he did a lot of preparatory work for Ivan III Vasilyevich to unify Russia. He was an extremely capable talent in troubled times. The letter sent by Mahama was already in the hands of the Grand Duke of Blindness. After he learned the contents of the letter, he summoned a group of officials to discuss specific military matters. Among them was the extremely famous Ivan the Great in Russian history. In 1440 AD, the second son of Vasily II, the Lord of the Grand Duchy of Moscow, was born. Vasily II's first son, Yuri, died at an early age, so Vasily II placed a lot of hope on this child. According to the suggestion of the Archbishop of the Moscow Principality, the child was named Ivan, which later became Ivan the Great. Chapter 1410. His son Ivan, his generals Boris, Pyotr, Sergei, as well as Maxim from Novgorod, Turgenev from Vyatka, and Vanya from Pskov were involved in the meeting. The first thing the blind duke did was to announce Muhammad's letter to the public. After that, he sat there quietly. He knew that after reading the letter, his subjects would definitely have something to say. As expected, after the letter was passed around, one of the generals, Sergei, was the first to speak. Grand Duke, this is a good thing. As long as we occupy Wuxia city, it will be equivalent to expanding our influence. This will be a great boost to our duchy and our Russian independence. Previously, they were afraid that the Mongols would suddenly interfere when they made a move on New Summer City. Now that the Mongols had the same idea and no longer had any concerns, it was time to make a move. Yes, we agree. Maxim and the others immediately voted in favor. Under the pressure of the blind Grand Duke, the power in their hands was getting smaller and smaller. If there was a chance to expand their influence, it would be a great opportunity to develop their strength. Naturally, no one wanted to miss out on something beneficial. After a while, several people spoke. Only Supreme General Boris and Ivan remained silent. They seemed to be thinking about something. The blind Grand Duke didn't hear them say anything, so he knew that they must have other ideas. He took the initiative to ask, "Ivan, what do you think?" "Father-in-law, I don't have any ideas. Everything will be done according to everyone's wishes." Ivan raised his head. His voice was calm, but in his heart he was somewhat unwilling. As early as when Wuxia first appeared here with the new army, Ivan had already dealt with them. At that time, Wuxia had received Yang Qindong's order to help the Rossi Duchy resist the pressure of the Golden Horde to the best of his ability. After the cooperation, the relationship between the two sides quickly became closer. It was also from then on that Ivan gained a better understanding of this Han army called the Five-Star Army. This army was well-equipped and well-trained. They fought in a methodical manner. Many of their advanced military concepts were often eye-catching. Furthermore, they often cooperated with each other to deal with the military oppression of the Mongol army. Gradually, Ivan began to have thoughts of using them for his own purposes. For this reason, Ivan made a heavy promise. He said that as long as Wuxia was willing to lead the army and surrender to him, he would become one of the great generals of the Ros Duchy in the future. At that time, there would not be many people in the entire country who would have a more important position than him. With such a promise, Wuxia only said that he would consider it. At that time, Ivan was still full of confidence, but after several years he still did not receive an answer, so he knew that the other party was tactfully rejecting him. Although Ivan was puzzled by this, he had never given up on the idea of making the other party surrender. In his opinion, the Five-Star Army was too far away, and there were many things that were beyond his reach. As long as he sincerely invited them, they would definitely be moved by his sincerity. However, the situation hadn't come to a conclusion yet. The main force of the Five-Star Army had actually arrived as reinforcements. This made him completely lose all hope of getting the other party to surrender. It was inevitable that he would feel disappointed, but he was a determined person after all. Since this path did not work, he would not think about it anymore. It was just a pity for a talent like Wuxia. Right, the main force of the Five-Star Army had arrived. He heard that his master, King Wunan of Damyang, had also come. If that was the case, would Wuxia realize his prowess after he defeated this opponent? Would it be possible for him to come under his banner? Unknowingly, Ivan was filled with anticipation for Yang Qindong's arrival. He wanted to see what kind of ability this person had to be able to make a valiant general like Wuxia work for him. Now that Ivan had expressed his stance, only great General Boris was left. This was a person that even the blind duke respected greatly. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that this person's words could sometimes be compared to several people, especially when it came to military matters. He had the ability to keep his word. After asking Ivan, Boris knew that it was time for him to express his stance. He summarized his thoughts and said, "Speaking of the Han army in New Summer City, they can't be considered our friends anymore. Although they helped us fight a few battles with the Mongol army a few years ago and played a big role, as the Mongol army gradually restrained their blade rays and we continued to grow stronger, they didn't do anything for us anymore. Dealing with them is something that should be done." This meant that he agreed, but everyone knew that Boris didn't finish his words. He must have something else to say. Sure enough, Boris continued to express his stance. This time, the Mongol Khan made his stance clear and decided to make a move on New Summer City. Moreover, he intentionally sent us away. This clearly means that he wants to borrow our hands to deal with Wuxia. Moreover, I heard that Wu Sheng's master is about to arrive. If we act rashly and fail, countless variables will appear in the outcome of this matter. This is very disadvantageous to me. You should know that King Wu Nan of the Great Ming dynasty was able to build a 20,000-strong White Russian army. This is enough to prove that this person has some means. Otherwise, why would our people risk their lives for him? Either we don't make a move against such an opponent, or if we do, we have to beat them until they have no choice but to retreat from this area. Well said. Great General Peter echoed loudly. This King Wunan of Damyang actually dares to build a White Russian army and use our people to fight. Does he really think that we don't exist? This kind of person needs to be taught a lesson. After everyone reached a consensus, a smile appeared on the face of Grand Duke Blindness, who was sitting at the head of the table. Well, since no one raises any objections, this matter will be handed over to General Boris. Everyone has to cooperate with him unconditionally. This is also a very important step in our expansion. We must win and we must not lose. Yes, Grand Duke. Everyone at the meeting loudly agreed. Thus, a large net was spread out to target Wu Sheng in New Summer City. New Summer City. It was originally an abandoned White Russian tribe's old site. But ever since Wu Sheng brought the New Summer Army here, he had begun to rebuild it. Taking into account the raw materials, although the city wasn't very big, it was still enough to support 200,000 to 300,000 people. Standing in the courtyard, Wu Sheng's face had a hint of vicissitudes of life. He stood straight and seemed to be thinking about something. If one paid attention to him, they would notice that his expression would occasionally become somewhat agitated. Sometimes, he would frown deeply as if he was thinking about some difficult problem. Needless to say, he was happy. There was already news that the sixth young master had set out from Siberia and was heading towards him. When he thought about how he hadn't seen the sixth young master for 9 years, the longing in his heart grew stronger. This feeling of reuniting after a long time naturally made him happy. But while he was happy, he was also somewhat worried. In the past 9 years, he hadn't completed his mission very well. Until now, he had only occupied an isolated city with more than 30,000 soldiers and more than 100,000 people. Due to the inconvenient transportation, Wu Sheng's progress in Yangtze's development would be delayed by a lot. But he also knew that in the past 9 years, Yang Chendong had built a huge empire, made a lot of contributions and conquered a lot of territory. In comparison, his own small achievements were somewhat unpresentable. He didn't know if the sixth young master would be satisfied or angry when he saw him. Although he said that he was alone and didn't have any support, he had brought his army with him. But after all, they had brought an army with them when they came. Although they had expanded a little compared to before, it was still very limited. This couldn't be considered a great achievement. With a sigh, Wu Sheng was dissatisfied with his own achievements in these 9 years. When Yang Chendong was developing and growing, wasn't he also alone? At that time, he didn't have the help of these armies. But to what extent did they achieve, and to what extent did he achieve? It was really infuriating to compare oneself to others. Just as he was sighing, the head of the guards, Zhu Zhen, appeared in the small courtyard with a secret letter. Military Commander, there's news. Surviving in the cracks, whether it was the Golden Horde or the Rossi Principalities, they were not existences that he could contend against. In such an environment, Wu Sheng attached great importance to intelligence work. In his opinion, a good piece of intelligence and a good intelligence officer could be equivalent to 10,000 elite soldiers at a critical time. Because of this, although he didn't expand his territory and the number of personnel was very limited, his intelligence work was progressing well. He had a stable source of information in these two large forces. Reaching out to take the report, Wu Sheng opened it and read. Soon his expression became very serious. Military Commander, did something big happen? Commander Zhu Zhen asked with concern. As Wu Sheng's most trusted person, he knew that ordinary small problems wouldn't attract intelligence officers to send reports. After all, spying was the best. If he didn't want to be exposed, he had to be less active. Since the report was sent, it was enough to prove that something big had happened. Looking at Wu Sheng's expression, it also confirmed this point. Yes, something big has happened. The Mongolian Khan is going to attack us. He even informed the Blind Duke. It won't be long before the enemy's troops arrive. They actually joined forces? Zhu Zhen was very shocked when he heard the news. The Mongolians and the White Russians were mortal enemies. They had been at war for hundreds of years. How could they join forces just like that? Haha, the sixth young master once said that there are no eternal friends, only eternal interests. Obviously, our existence has made some people worried, especially the sixth young master who is about to bring his main forces. They are afraid that we will attack them from the inside. Wu Sheng's face showed a trace of a bitter smile, but it was immediately replaced by a determined expression. You want to deal with me? No matter how strong you are, what can you do? Commander Zhu, we should also make some preparations. There are some things that should be settled. Chapter 14:11. Ever since the Mongols weakened and the White Russians became stronger, Wu Xing knew that Wuxia would be besieged one day, but he didn't expect it to be so soon. Presumably, it had something to do with the sixth young master's imminent arrival. If it was in the past, Wu Xing would have considered bowing to one of the powers in exchange for some space to survive. But now the sixth young master was coming. He should make some achievements for the world to see. He had endured humiliation for so many years, and it was time to show his sword. Zhu Jun was also excited at this moment. Was the army commander finally going to fight a big battle? This was great. As a soldier, war was the best platform to show one's worth. He must seize this opportunity. Next, under Wu Sheng's signal, the whole Wuxia became busy. The commoners were persuaded to leave one after another. They were advised to find a safe place and return only after Wuxia city was completely safe. The army also began to mobilize before the war. But anyone with a mind and knowledge could feel that this was going to be a big battle. For a moment, everyone became nervous, afraid, and excited. It didn't take long for the Grand Duke of Blindness to hear about what happened in Wuxia city. When he heard that Wuxia was ready for war, he knew that the news must have been leaked. But he couldn't figure out whether the person who leaked the news was from the Golden Horde or his own men. He only knew that some things needed to be done quickly. He sent for his son Ivan to inform him of the situation. Then he asked, "How is the army's preparation?" "Father-in-law, the time is still too short. If the army is to be assembled and ready, it will take at least 10 to 15 months. Ivan didn't expect Wu Sheng to get the news so quickly. His face couldn't help but turn ugly. "No, it's too long. We can't wait. How about this? Isn't Kashgar the closest to Wuxia? Let's mobilize troops from there first. In a while, take my order to Beojil and send troops from there. Don't ask to take the city immediately, just entangle their main force." The blind duke shook his head. The opportunity was fleeting. Since the enemy was already prepared, they couldn't wait any longer. Otherwise, the situation would change even more as time passed. Bowler also knew that his father-in-law was right. He was also worried that the Han reinforcements wouldn't arrive as time passed. If that was the case, then it would be troublesome. He immediately gave the order to go. At the same time that the Ross Empire made the decision, the Golden Horde also sent a light cavalry of 30,000 men from the northernmost Beojil to Wuxia. The two armies, one in the west and one in the south, vowed to destroy Wu Sheng in Wuxia. During this period of time, the evacuation of the civilians in the city was basically completed. When Wu Sheng saw that there were no longer any civilians on the originally bustling streets, he knew that it was time to abandon the city. That's right, Wu Sheng had never thought of defending New Summer City to the death. Otherwise, he wouldn't have sent the commoners out of the city. As for why he wanted to defend, it was because he knew that there was an enemy spy in the new army, and this spy's status wasn't low. Now that he was about to leave the city, it was time to get rid of this spy buried in the army. Zhu Zhen passed down the order to convene the meeting. The Third Army was originally the Yangxie's trump card. The soldiers under its command were the earliest Lung Feng soldiers. However, they hadn't received the support of a single Yangxie soldier for 9 years. Now the army was in chaos. They were no longer pure Han like they used to be. Apart from the Lung Feng's 3rd Division, which was still made up of Lung Feng soldiers, the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd Divisions were made up of young men from Mongolia and Russia. Apart from these 4 divisions, there was also the Nuzan Cavalry Division under the command of the Third Army. In the large tent, Wu Xing sat at the head of the table. Below him stood the 3rd Division's Division Commander Chun Yang and the Nuzan Cavalry Division's Division Commander Yi La. Below them stood the 1st Division's Division Commander Min Fu, the 2nd Division's Division Commander Luo Rue, and the 3rd Division's Division Commander Dan Shi. When Wu Xing saw that all the military officers above the division level were present, he first swept his gaze across everyone. His gaze was unfathomable. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have received intelligence that the Rossi Duchy of the Golden Horde has sent an army to our Wuxia city. In line with the principle of saving the people and losing the land, I have decided to abandon Wuxia city and leave this place." What? When he said this, the 5 division commanders were shocked. Obviously, this was the first time they had heard this news. Wu Xing sat at the head of the table and saw everyone's reaction. Especially when he saw the 3rd Division's division commander Dan Shi, he sneered. After a long while, the 5 division commanders stopped their discussion and looked at Wu Xing. They wanted to continue listening to their commander. They also wanted to ask, since they were not going to defend the city, why did they still dig a horse trap outside the city? What was the use of doing these useless things? Wu Xing had already guessed what everyone was thinking. His lips moved and he said, I know that everyone must have a lot of questions. Well, I will explain it to you. Division Commander Dan, you say it? Dan Shi, the 3rd Division's division commander, was suddenly called out. This made him, who was already nervous and had an ugly expression, tremble uncontrollably. When he noticed that everyone was looking at him, he knew that he had to open his mouth. He pretended to be confused and said, Military Commander, why? I don't know either. You still don't know? Don't you always tell the great Khan of the Golden Horde about our 3rd Division's actions? Why are you saying that you don't know now? Wu Xing said with interest. The moment Wu Xing's words fell, Dan Shi's expression changed drastically. He instinctively wanted to draw his saber, but Zhu Zhen, who had been watching him from the side, was one step faster than him. He grabbed Dan Shi's right arm and restrained him with a twist of his arm. He didn't forget to say, What's wrong, Division Commander Dan? Are you going to reveal your true intentions? Dan Shi rolled his eyes and immediately shouted, It's a misunderstanding. It's all a misunderstanding. Why would I draw my sword? What you want to do, everyone can see it clearly. Do you think you can still quibble at this time? Men, take him away. Zhu Zhen shouted coldly, and 4 soldiers from the guard regiment walked in from outside the hall. They were holding ropes and it was obvious that they were prepared. They tied Dan Shi up tightly in no time. Seeing that he could no longer move, Dan Shi knew that his plan was over. He had no choice but to risk everything and shout, Surrender! How can you be a match for the Golden Horde? If you surrender now, I can put in a few good words for you and spare your lives. Shut his mouth and behead him. Wu Xing, who was sitting at the head of the table, pulled a long face. He was about to die, but he still wanted to bewitch others. Even if he was killed 1,000 times, it wouldn't be too much. Dan Shi was taken away and the hall became quiet again. However, it could be seen that everyone's faces were a little ugly, especially the head of the 1st Division, Min Fu. He was originally half Mongolian and like Dan Shi, he was not a pure Han. He was also worried that the same method would be used on him. But Wu Xing changed his angry look and comforted, Dan Shi is willing to be a dog of the Golden Horde. That is his ambition. But he shouldn't betray the 5-star army for his promotion and wealth. So it's not a pity to kill him. But you are different. You are loyal. I know this and so does Bugnam of Gojoseon. You can relax. With these words, everyone's expression became better. Especially Chun Yang, the commander of the 3rd Division, and Yi La, the commander of the Nuzan Cavalry Division. There was a faint excitement in their eyes. Both of them had fought with Yang Qindong and knew how powerful the 6th young master was. They had received news that the 6th young master was coming from Siberia. They should be able to meet him soon. Thinking that the 6th young master was coming, their bitter days would come to an end. Now was the time for them to perform well. They couldn't help but feel a little excited. Now they naturally listened to Wu Xing's words. Wu Xing was also in a good mood. After dealing with the traitor, Dan Shi, he felt more at ease. He ordered, Gan Fong will take over the position of the 3rd Division's commander. Everyone else's position will remain unchanged. After the meeting, everyone should prepare to leave the city. This time, I want to disappoint the enemy. They spent a lot of effort but still couldn't find us. To put it nicely, it was a strategic retreat. To put it bluntly, it was a retreat. Wu Xing had no choice. With more than 30,000 men under his command, he really couldn't fight the enemy head-on. Otherwise he would be digging his own grave. After the meeting, the division commanders returned to their troops. Half a day later, New Summer City became an empty city. Except for the city walls and houses that couldn't be moved, nothing that could be used in the future was left behind. 2 days later, the 30,000 infantrymen of the Ross Duchy, led by Ivan, were the first to arrive outside New Summer City. When they saw the city gates open, they didn't dare to enter directly. Instead, they arranged for 100 people to enter the city to take a look. Only after he was certain that everyone in the city had left did he enter the city. As soon as they entered, they saw an extremely poor and empty city. After searching for half a day, they couldn't find a single grain of food. As for cattle, horses, and sheep, they couldn't even find their feces. Half a day later, the 30,000 cavalrymen of the Golden Horde arrived and got the same result. Chapter 14:12. Ivan was naturally very angry that Wu Sheng had retreated without a fight. What made him even angrier was that the general of the Golden Horde actually wanted to occupy a city that had nothing. In a fit of anger, he ordered his men to burn down all the houses in New Summer City and tear down the city walls. He even had someone leave a letter on the broken city wall with the words, "Wu Sheng is a coward," written in large letters. Ivan left angrily, leaving behind the general of the Golden Horde, who didn't know whether to laugh or cry. There was nothing to linger about in such a deserted city. He had no choice but to retreat and report back to his superiors. When New Summer City regained its silence and desolation, the scouts sent by Wu Sheng rushed back. When they saw that the city had been destroyed to this point, they were naturally very angry. Especially when they saw the words left on the broken wall, they turned around and left. They wanted to tell the army commander what had happened here and let the army commander make a decision. In the forest not far away, Wu Sheng met the scouts who had returned to report and learned of what had happened in New Summer City. His eyes immediately turned blood red. He was very angry. The destruction of the city meant that his years of hard work had been destroyed. How dare they call him a coward? Did they really think that he couldn't do anything to them? Gather all troops. Target Toph City. Set out. Wu Sheng decided to give them a taste of their own medicine. Although he didn't have the strength to attack a strong city, he had no problem dealing with a few small cities in the Ross Duchy. As long as he was fast enough and retreated in time, there shouldn't be any problems in terms of safety. The army commander made the decision. Although the division commanders thought that it was a little hasty, there was no such military plan before. But when they heard that New Summer City had been completely destroyed, they were all angry. No one tried to persuade the army commander, so they decided to take revenge. Toph City was about the size of a county. It was the northernmost city of the Ross Duchy. There were no more than 1,000 soldiers stationed here, and only about 20,000 civilians. A small city like this had neither resources nor wealth. Very few people would take a fancy to it. Therefore, when Wu Sheng appeared outside the city with more than 30,000 cavalrymen and entered the city without much effort, the people here either ran or fled. Those who couldn't escape would simply close their doors and hide in their homes, not daring to make a sound. Only a few people were injured, and they were injured by the Ross Empire's muskets. However, they were able to take over Toph City. This made Wu Sheng and the others feel less angry. Seeing that it was getting late, they decided to rest here for the night. They would also rob the city's storage of food and leave the next morning. It had only been one night, and there was no prior plan for this operation. Presumably, even the Russian Empire would not be able to find out about his goal. Wu Sheng, who was very confident about this, found a relatively large courtyard and went to sleep. In the middle of the night, the sound of galloping horses could be heard. The head of the guards, Zhu Zhen, pushed open the door and entered. He said with a panicked expression, "Military commander, something bad has happened. There are many people outside the city and they have surrounded us." "There's such a thing?" While feeling shocked, Wu Sheng put on his armor and quickly rushed up the tower. At this moment, several teachers were standing on top of the city gate tower. All of them had solemn expressions. Clearly, they had realized that the situation was not good. After Wu Sheng reached the top of the city gate tower, all he could see were torches. The number of enemies gave him a feeling that it was impossible to count. "Military commander, it's too dark. We can't see how many enemies are coming. We also don't know which direction to charge in. What should we do?" 3rd Division Commander Chunyang walked over and asked for military orders. Wu Sheng was not a god. If others couldn't see clearly, he naturally couldn't see clearly either. However, as a military commander, he still had the calmness that he should have. "Don't panic. We'll deal with whatever comes our way. Since we've been surrounded, we won't be able to figure out if there's an ambush outside. We might as well stay here and wait for reinforcements to come and rescue us. When the time comes, a bad thing will turn into a good thing." Although he said it so confidently, it frightened the other teachers. They were waiting for the military commander to decide which direction to break out of the encirclement, but they didn't expect that they would have to defend the city. Seeing that everyone's expression was not good, Wu Sheng said confidently, "What? Have you all forgotten? The 6th young master will be here soon. As long as we spread the news, it won't take long for reinforcements to arrive. We are no longer homeless children, rootless duckweeds." Yes. Chunyang nodded. "Then we'll defend the city. There's a lot of food in the city. We can hold on for a while until the sixth young master arrives. That will be the time for us to take revenge. Division Commander Yi Dai was also excited. As high-ranking officers who joined the five-star army early on, they all treated Yang Qindong like a god. It was as if as long as the sixth young master arrived, there was nothing that couldn't be solved. Since the two teachers had expressed their opinions, the other three teachers couldn't say anything. Although they didn't know why everyone was so confident, the discipline in the five-star army was strict. Once the military commander gave an order, everyone had to follow it. Otherwise they would be beheaded. Seeing that everyone agreed, Wuxia said, "If that's the case, then send someone out to deliver the message. We have to inform the sixth young master as soon as possible." "Chim, is Vice Division Commander Lu Dai here?" "I am here." The Deputy Division Commander of the Nuzhen Cavalry Division, Lu Dai, stepped forward. "The sixth young master knows about you. This time you'll be the one to deliver the message. Don't worry, you'll only take a few people out. They'll only treat you as a decoy and won't chase after you. Remember, before we find the main force, we can't rest for a moment. The hope of the Third Army is all on you." Wuxia walked up and patted Lu Dai's shoulder. "Yes." Lu Dai felt a lot of pressure. He saluted and repeated, "Please don't worry, even if I die from exhaustion, I won't rest for a moment before we find the main force." Lu Dai left with less than 100 cavalry out of the city. Sure enough, as Wuxia had said, the enemy soldiers on the outer perimeter only stopped them for a moment, and then let them go. With the help of the enemy's torches, Wuxia heaved a sigh of relief when he saw that Lu Dai and the others had broken out of the encirclement. He then confidently said to everyone, "Leave a small group of people behind to guard the city. The rest of you can go back and sleep. Don't worry, it's so dark. We can't rush out and the enemy won't rush in." Being able to remain calm even if Mount Tai collapses in front of you was the style of a general. On this point Wuxia had done it. In fact, his heart was not as calm as it seemed on the surface. He did not know where Yang Qindong had gone with the main army, nor did he know if Lu Dai could find them. However, as the commander of an army and the main general of the army, he had to cheer everyone on at this moment. Outside Tove City, Ivan was leading 70,000 White Russians to the city gate. They were waiting for Wuxia to escape. Their muskets were loaded with solid cartridges, their horses were saddled, and their soldiers were ready to provide support to the enemy at any time. Ivan was the one who burned down New Summer City and left the message. He didn't want to leave an empty city for the Golden Horde's army to live in, but he was also preparing to lure Wuxia into action. Previously, his relationship with Wuxia was quite good, so he had a good understanding of this person. He knew that such a hot-blooded man couldn't be provoked. So after he left New Summer City, he sent out a large number of scouts to keep an eye on these small cities. His intuition told him that Wuxia wouldn't let this go so easily. Sure enough, just as he met up with the 50,000 reinforcements sent by the duchy, he received a report that the Third Army was spotted outside Tove City. Immediately he rushed over with his army and blocked the way. Ivan was satisfied, but he didn't let his guard down. After all, it was night time. The enemy couldn't see him and he couldn't see them either. So he immediately ordered his men not to attack unless they had his orders. He had to wait for the New Summer Army's main force to leave the city before attacking. Because of this order, Lu Dai and his cavalry weren't troubled too much when they left. But after half a day they still didn't see any movement in the city. This time General Shigal was suspicious. "Gongzi, could it be that Wuxia who escaped just now?" "Impossible." Without any hesitation, Ivan said with certainty, "Wuxia is a man with a strong sense of pride. Running away from a battle is not something he would do." Because they were once friends, he dared to say this with confidence. Although he didn't know what Wuxia was thinking, he was confident that there would be a bloody battle between the two of them. The next step would be to see who was more powerful. The night passed just like that. Compared to the five-star army, the White Russian army outside the city was much worse off. They had to be on guard against the people in the city escaping, so they didn't sleep much. So when the sun rose, the White Russian army didn't have the energy to immediately charge. When the sun rose, Wuxia, who was on the city wall, saw the White Russian army's true strength. When he saw that the enemy had an army of 70,000, with 30,000 cavalry and 20,000 musketeers, he could not help but rejoice that he had not rashly attacked last night. Otherwise, who knew how many soldiers he would have lost when the musketeers fired in the night. After seeing the enemy's true strength, Wuxia knew that this was going to be a tough battle. He placed all his hopes on Lu Dai, who had gone out to report the situation. As for himself, there was only one thing he had to do, and that was to set up a trap. For example, the White Russian army didn't immediately attack the city. This was what he wanted. He ordered his soldiers to defend the city well. There was no need to provoke the enemy. Then he went to check the city's warehouse. He had to calculate carefully to see how long the city's rations could last and how long he could last. He also wanted to see how much kerosene, wooden sleepers, and bows were left to defend the city. If they weren't complete, he would have to demolish the houses in the city. Chapter 14:13. A country may be big, but a warmonger is bound to die. At this time, although the Yang faction was incomparably powerful, the pace of expansion was a little too fast. Just the external forces alone were divided into three. Along the way there were battles between the Ili region and several other countries. Hundreds of thousands of cavalrymen and infantrymen were mobilized there. Just the amount of food needed to feed the men and horses every day was not a small number, not to mention the fact that there were always deaths in war. Those who were injured needed money to be treated, those who died needed money to be buried, and those who died needed to be compensated. The second front was the sea. There were hundreds of thousands of soldiers, hundreds of ships, and thousands of cannons. Every time they fought, the amount of ammunition used was not small. Along the way were 100,000 cavalrymen, 1,000,000 peasants, and a steady stream of people from all over the world who were marching towards the Golden Horde from Siberia. The road was rugged, the distance was long, and the consumption was astronomical. Over time, it would form a considerable pressure on the finances. Fortunately, the Yang faction had a vast territory, and most of the provinces were already on the basis of self-sufficiency. They could effectively support the Yang faction headquarters. If it were any other dynasty, they probably wouldn't have been able to hold on. Even so, in the long run it would be a burden on the finances. Yang Qindong knew this. When he led the troops into the Liaodong region, he made the decision to fight as quickly as possible. While there were disadvantages, there were also advantages. For example, when the navy attacked the cities, they seized a large amount of wealth and transported it back to Chichen City. There were not only gold and silver but also a large number of minerals that Yangtze needed. This income had exceeded the cost of the navy. This was a good start, and it also made many people in Yangtze realize how useful the sea could be. It was because of this that no one openly questioned Yang Qindong's expansion. Even if someone said something, he might not care, and it would not affect the morale of the army. But it was good that nothing happened. There was also the silver mining in Shaowei province that was starting to show results. As more and more silver mines were discovered, the mining team mobilized hundreds of thousands of people. The amount of silver mined every day was not a small number. For this reason, Yangtze's treasury was greatly supported, and the pressure of needing money was not as great. As Yang Qindong thought about this, a smile appeared on his face. He had just received a piece of news that made him happy through the telegram. Feng Ke's research team in Crimson City, after he went back to teach them last time, had finally rushed out the first true steam engine. This was all thanks to the engine prototype that Yang Qindong had proposed, and after pushing it back, the experiment was finally successful. Historically, in 1679 AD, the French physicist Denis Barbin built the first working model of a steam engine after watching steam escape from his pressure cooker. His contemporary Samuel Morand also proposed the idea of a steam engine. Now that they had appeared more than 200 years earlier, Yang Qindong did not dare to imagine how great of an advantage they would have. Although the vacuum steam engine was now used to pump water into the mine, the principle was that after steam was introduced into the cylinder, the valve was closed, and then cold water was poured into the cylinder. When the steam condensed, it created a vacuum. The air pressure on the other side of the piston pushed the piston. In the mine, a rod that went deep into the shaft was connected to drive a pump. The movement of the steam engine's piston was transmitted through the rod to the pump's piston to pump water out of the well. But no matter what, there was still a steam engine. If there was one, there would be two. He saw hope. To the people of the future, this thing was not complicated. To put it bluntly, a steam engine needed a boiler that boiled water to produce high-pressure steam. This boiler could use wood, coal, oil, natural gas, or even combustible garbage as a heat source. The steam expanded to push the piston to work. Once the steam engine technology matured, it was widely used in power stations, factories, locomotives, ships, and other fields. It was especially used on warships as the only prime mover at that time. After the telegram was sent, Yang Qindong was excited and happy for a while. He knew that with the steam engine, whether it was mining or other fields, the efficiency would increase a lot. This was the beginning of real industrial development. He personally wrote a telegram praising the research team led by Feng Ke. He also gave a large reward and a second-class medal to show their merit. Yang Xie had a total of 7 medals, representing 7 different merits. From low to high they were iron, bronze, silver, gold medals, third class, second class, and the highest level first class medal. These medals were not only a symbol of status and honor, but they could also be used to exchange for large amounts of money and land with the Yang faction. In times of crisis, they could even save one's life and had some of the effects of the death exemption medal. This was a good thing that everyone in the Yang faction wanted, especially a second-class medal. As a second-class medal, it could probably be used to offset any mistakes other than those that committed a rebellion. This was the first time such a medal was issued, and Feng Ke was the first recipient. It was clear that Yang Qindong valued him highly. It was also clear that technology was the #1 development force. Who knew how many people were envious and jealous of him? At the same time, Yang Qindong also asked the other party to build more steam engines and continue to improve them, so that they could be a great help to Yang Xie's development. In a good mood, Yang Qindong, who was riding on the white dragon, had a smile on his face. It wasn't until another telegram was sent in front of him that his good mood was broken. The telegram was sent by the commander of the world's first cavalry army, Jianghu. It said that the cavalry scouts he sent out met the deputy division commander of the 3rd Army, Lu Dai, at the border between the Ural region and the Northwest region. He learned from Lu Dai that the 3rd Army was besieged in Tove City and was waiting for reinforcements. Lu Dai didn't disappoint Wuxia. He led less than 80 cavalry out of the encirclement and ran for 3 days tirelessly. Along the way many people fell behind and many died of exhaustion on the way to deliver the message. Finally, when Lu Dai was tired and hungry, he finally met the scouts of the world's first cavalry army and was able to send the message. This telegram didn't only say that Wuxia was besieged, it also said that the Golden Horde and the Ras Duchy were very hostile towards the 5-star army. Yang Qindong didn't expect that because of his sudden appearance, the two feuds would temporarily join forces. This wasn't a good thing for Yang Qindong, who was an outsider, and he couldn't allow this to happen. If they join forces, then cut them off. Send a telegram to Commander Tianhu to rush to Tove City at all costs to save Wuxia and the other soldiers. At the same time, order my army to speed up. We will quickly give the Golden Horde a fierce blow. Tell them that this king is here. Yang Qindong said with an unfriendly expression. He always believed that if you offend me, I will pay you back. Many times he even took the initiative to look for trouble. Now, how could he back down just because these two forces joined forces? Moreover, this so-called alliance in Yang Qindong's eyes was more of a sign. He didn't believe that they would really care about each other's survival. They probably wanted each other to die early. This was his chance to destroy them one by one. After the telegram was sent, Tianhu saw the contents and his expression brightened. The world's first cavalry army hadn't fought a hard battle since the expansion of the Free Division. Now was the time to challenge themselves. As the commander, Tianhu had always wanted to prove that Yang Qindong's choice was right. This expansion of the army not only greatly increased the number of soldiers, but also the strength of the army. Yang Xie's expenditure on the world's first cavalry army was worth it. Men, call 2nd Division Commander Lu Duo and 4th Division Commander Su De. Tianhu's voice was loud as he looked to the west. At this moment, his heart was filled with fighting spirit. Tove City. 7 days had passed. In these 7 days, Ivan led the White Russian army to attack dozens of times. With the help of the musketeers, the soldiers climbed up the city walls many times, but were chased down by Wuxia's soldiers. In these 7 days, both the attackers and the defenders had paid a heavy price. Tove City was also riddled with holes and looked like a fragile egg. Especially with the White Russian army's cannons in place, the attack would probably start tomorrow. In history, the reason why Ivan was able to succeed his father and lead the Russians to defeat the Golden Horde and achieve independence was because of the importance of their firearms. Otherwise, in terms of cold weapons, who would be a match for the Mongolian cavalry? At this time, the Rasi Duchy had bought many firearms from the West and had built some factories to develop firearms. In history they were a military power, but now they were just in the embryonic stage. Even so, under the constant pressure of the Golden Horde, the Rasi Duchy's progress was quite fast. Although their foundation was weaker in terms of combat strength, they were much stronger than the Great Ming dynasty. This was what it meant when there was pressure, there was motivation. Relying on the flintlock in his hand, Ivan didn't suffer much during the siege, and it was only a 1 versus 2 battle. As the cannons were sent to the front line, one could imagine that the initiative was completely in his hands. As expected of a general, you actually forced me to this point. General Wu, tomorrow I will not hold back. Ivan stared fiercely at Toph City, which was 2 miles away, with his large, spirited eyes. After that he turned around and left. He admired Wu Sheng and gave him absolute respect, which was to attack with all his might. Even so, he still let Wu Sheng defend the city for 7 days. Ivan could not help but sigh at Wu Sheng's strength. However, he knew that with the appearance of firearms, individual bravery was no longer important. Tomorrow he would definitely break into the city. At that time he would give Wu Sheng a chance to return to his side. Otherwise he would have to kill him. Chapter 14:14. As the future Ivan the Great, he had an extremely firm belief. In his eyes, there were only 2 kinds of people. One was to be used by him and the other was to be killed by him. It was because of this potential that he was able to create such glory and become the first person to achieve complete independence in the Russian Empire. On the city gate tower of Tove City, Wu Sheng heaved a sigh of relief when he saw the Russian army retreating again before dusk. However, his face did not look relaxed. The Third Army was able to hold on until now only because they were defending the city and Yang Qindong was coming. These gave them the belief to hold on. However, only Wu Sheng knew that the Third Army was already at the end of its rope. The rations in the city were running out, and the soldiers were exhausted after 7 days of continuous fighting. More importantly, they had long lost contact with the outside world. No one knew if Lu Dai had passed the news of them being surrounded to the main army, or even if he had found the main army, no one knew. It could be said that they were holding on because they did not know what was going to happen. Once the city gates were breached, they would be able to breathe a sigh of relief. It would probably be the time for the army to be defeated. Wu Sheng raised his head and looked to the east. There was a glimmer of hope and determination in his eyes. He had already made a decision. If the reinforcements could not arrive in time, he would shed his blood in Tove City to repay Yang Qindong's kindness. This might be the last thing he could do. Commander, the scouts have discovered that the Russian army's artillery has entered the camp. The battle tomorrow will be much more dangerous. The Nuzhen Cavalry Division requests to join the battle. Just as Zi Wuxing was lost in his thoughts, Commander Yella walked to his side and gave him a standard military salute before speaking in a decisive voice. The Nuzhen Cavalry Division was a group of veterans who had followed Wuxing all the way from the first city. At that time, it was only a cavalry division. Later, as the army continued to expand, it was upgraded. In the past 9 years, there were not many veterans left in the division. Most of them had died in the war, but their combat power had never decreased. Soldiers who grew up in the flames of war had always been brave and fearless. It was because of the Nuzhen Cavalry Division's combat power that Wu Sheng did not send them up the city gate tower, no matter how difficult it was. Since they were the most elite cavalrymen, of course, they would only be able to display their advantage if they were mounted on war horses. Wu Sheng's lips moved, but in the end he nodded and agreed. He knew that this was the last moment. Just like how Yi Fan understood him, he also understood his opponent. This was a ruthless person who would never give any opponent a chance to breathe. All right, it's approved. Yes, General. Yella saluted again, then turned around and left. Wu Sheng's eyes moistened as he watched the Nuzhen's resolute footsteps gradually disappear into the distance. He knew very well that the Nuzhen Cavalry Division only had a little more than 8,000 people, and the White Russians still had 20,000 cavalry that had not moved. The White Russians were tall and strong and they had immense strength. It was not guaranteed that they would win in a one-on-one battle. The ratio was close to 3-1, and the outcome of this battle was precarious. However, he had no other choice. If he didn't let the Nuzhen Cavalry Division charge out now, once the city was breached, the advantage of the cavalry would be greatly reduced. That would be a huge loss. Looking at Lu Dai's departing figure, Wu Sheng knew that he might not return this time. His mood instantly became much more downcast. That night, both the Third Corps and the White Russians had a good night's sleep. They knew that the final battle would be tomorrow, and they had to use this opportunity to recuperate and preserve their strength for tomorrow's battle. However, on a mountain path a few hundred li away, a group of 20,000 cavalrymen was galloping quickly with 3 horses each. Under the limited moonlight, the cavalrymen were racing against time. They came like the wind and left like lightning, heading straight for Tove City. The sky was finally bright, and the White Russians outside the city started cooking. Steam rose from the camp and smoke rose in spirals. In Tove City, Wu Sheng had already changed into a clean set of armor and walked out of the barracks. Last night, he gave the order to take out all the food in the city for the army's breakfast. For this reason, some of the White Russians in the city had their food stored in their homes searched, causing many people to cry. Wuxia couldn't care less about this. If these were Han people, he would rather starve to death than steal food from them. However, they were a foreign race. The sixth young master had said that those who were not of his race would have different intentions. Since that was the case, so what if they stole food? What could they do to him? If they wanted to blame someone, they could only blame the White Russians led by Ivan outside the city. Both sides seemed to have foreseen something, and neither side was in a hurry. The breakfast lasted for 2 hours. At around 9 o'clock in the morning, the two sides finally got into position, ready to fight to the death. Cannons were pushed to the front of the White Russians. The black cannons were aimed at the walls of Tove City, ready to fire at any moment. "General, why don't we capture some of the civilians and bring them up to the city walls? That way the White Russians will have some reservations," the 1st Division's commander, Min Fu, suggested to Wu Xing. "No need." Wu Xing shook his head without hesitation. He had already robbed the White Russians of their food, and he had already let them down. How could he joke around with their lives? Furthermore, based on his understanding of Ivan, even if he captured the White Russians and brought them up to the city walls, he would not stop Ivan from ordering the cannons to fire. It was still the same words. The other party was a ruthless person, a person who would not easily give up in order to achieve his goal. Since that was the case, why bother? Not only would it disgust Ivan, but it would also disgust him. After rejecting Min Fu's suggestion, Wu Xing looked to his side. When he did not see Commander Yella, he knew that Yella was ready. With a sigh, he raised his head again, and his eyes were filled with determination. "Everyone listen to my orders. When the cannon booms, everyone find cover and hide. After the order is given, all soldiers will fire their bows and arrows. Let's give the enemy a fierce wave of attacks first." Wu Xing was very familiar with cannons. After all, they were the Cold Vanguard Division's foundation, and they were the first to use guns and cannons. However, in the past few years they had not received any support, and the Type 95 had run out of ammunition. Now he had found a safe place to hide them. Since he had played with guns and cannons before, he knew the power of these things, so he had already prepared a countermeasure. After the soldiers heard the order, they responded in unison. Under the leadership of the company commander, platoon leader, and squad leader, they each found a safe place to hide and took out all their bows and arrows, preparing for the final battle. Under the city gate tower, 20 cannons were slowly pushed forward. They stopped 300 meters away from Tove City as if there was no one around. Some of the cannons of the White Russians were made by themselves, and some were bought from Western merchants. Some of the better cannons had a range of 3 to 4 kilometers, which was much better than the ones made by Ming. However, Ivan still gave the order to push the cannons to a distance of 300 meters. He did not want to create enough psychological pressure for the 5-star army to defend the city. After the 20 cannons were placed, Ivan rode on his horse and shouted from the middle of the army, giving the order to fire. Boom boom boom. Boom boom boom. The cannons shot into the sky and quickly landed on the city walls of Tove City. Immediately, a series of earth-shaking sounds could be heard. Then rocks flew everywhere from the explosion. Pieces of the city walls also began to peel off, falling everywhere. Smoke and dust filled the sky and the ground shook. At this moment, the 3rd Star Army could only hide and take the hits. They did not have the strength to fight back at all. The commander of the Wu Xing army hid in a safe bunker. His face was dark the whole time. He thought to himself hopefully, "Just you wait. When the 6th young master comes, he will show you what a real cannon is. When that time comes, I hope you can still be so arrogant." It was as if he was chanting scriptures in his heart. After about half an hour, the sound of the cannons finally stopped. Wu Xing opened his eyes and shouted, "The enemy is about to attack the city. Everyone prepare your bows and arrows." Under the city walls, after the sound of the cannons, the White Russians began to attack. In the previous cannon fire, not only did more than half of the city walls outside Tove City fall off, a part of the city walls also collapsed. This was a city wall made of mountain rocks. There was no cement to adhere to it, so it was indeed much worse in terms of sturdiness. There was a serious gap in the city walls, and the White Russians moved forward along the collapsed corner. The White Russians at the front were soldiers with shields in their hands. They were preparing to defend themselves against an attack from arrows. Fire! As Commander Wu Xing shouted from the top of the city gate tower, tens of thousands of arrows were released. Countless arrows appeared from the sky and fell to the ground. The shields were effective, and in a short period of time, countless shields were pierced by arrows. One White Russian soldier after another fell to the ground due to the lack of protection, or some of the people who had been hit by arrows were howling on the ground. However, this was not enough to stop the battle. Even more White Russian soldiers raised their muskets and swords and charged forward. War was cruel, and this was especially true. When a large number of White Russian soldiers took advantage of the opening and rushed up the tower, the most brutal close combat began. One side wanted to rush up the city walls and occupy this place. The other side wanted to defend this place and not allow anyone to rush up. When their goals were in conflict, the only thing that mattered was who had the bigger fist and who had the final say. On top of the city walls, after a large number of White Russian soldiers swarmed in, many soldiers from the 5-star army also charged out. They held swords, sabers, and spears in their hands as they charged at the White Russian soldiers who were much taller than them. Chapter 14-15. Papa Papa. Papa Papa. With the sound of gunfire and smoke rising, the soldiers of the 5-star army who rushed forward were hit by the bullets and fell to the ground with blood all over their bodies. The distance of a few dozen meters was filled with human lives. Taking advantage of the short distance and the time taken for the other side to reload their gunpowder, the two sides finally clashed and began to engage in close combat. Under the brandishing of swords and sabers, heads were tossed high into the air one after another. Limbs were chopped off and fell to the ground. Lives were quickly lost one after another. There was no absolute victor here. Even if the side that survived in the end, it would be a Pyrrhic victory. Under the blades and swords, there was no distinction between identity and status. It was only about who was more agile, stronger, and luckier. The cruel close combat on the city gate tower unfolded. Ivan watched all of this with a smile on his face. Since the army had already climbed up the city gate tower, it meant that the initial victory had begun. With the advantage in numbers, he was 100% confident that he could win this battle. It was just a matter of time. His gaze was no longer focused on the city gate tower. He already had an idea of the situation there. He was now looking at the south gate of Tove City. He was waiting for something. Amidst the expectant gazes, the southern city gate opened from the inside as expected. Strong horses rushed out from the city, and cavalry warriors with sabers in their hands roared as they charged into the battlefield. Haha, they're finally out. Seeing the cavalry charging out of the city, Ivan was not only fearless, but he was also very happy. Then he said to the messenger beside him, "Raise the flag and order the cavalry to charge." The 20,000 White Russian cavalry that had been waiting on both sides of the army saw the flag and quickly charged from both sides. Their target was the Nuzan cavalry division charging out of the city. As the division commander, Yella led the charge at the very front. Behind him was a group of 40 to 50 cavalrymen. At this moment they were using Yella as the tip of the arrow formation, charging forward at high speed. Even though they could see the White Russian cavalry approaching from afar, none of them showed a trace of fear. The cavalry charge had always been a straight line. If anyone was scared or cowardly during this process, it would only create an opportunity for the enemy to kill them. The Nuzan cavalry division soldiers knew this very well. Everyone shouted loudly as if they wanted to vent the anger in their hearts. The two torrents got closer and closer, and then they quickly collided. Next, it was the arrow tip against the arrow tip. A battle of life and death had begun. The arrow tip formation is indeed powerful. Ivan looked at everything that happened and said with emotion. He was a person with great learning ability. Ever since he saw the new army use this formation to defeat the Golden Horde cavalry with the same number of people, he learned this method. Now that he was using it, he was very satisfied with the results. In a short period of time, both the city walls and the city walls had entered a white-hot tragic battle. Almost every second someone died. At this moment human lives seemed so ordinary and worthless. The flames of the battle continued, because both sides and the cannons were no longer useful. Ivan also ordered the cannoneers to pick up swords and sabers and use them as echelons of the army. He needed to send these soldiers up when the Third Army could no longer hold on. At that time they would be the straw that broke the camel's back, the key to victory. 2 hours passed, and the battlefield was shrouded in the stench of blood, making people want to vomit. However, no one seemed to notice. The dead were already dead, while the living were still fighting, trying to seize a chance to live from the hands of the Grim Reaper. It's about time. After the battle had lasted for nearly 4 hours, Ivan said with emotion. Then the flag was raised high again. The moment it was waved down, the 20,000 White Russian soldiers all pressed forward. The addition of these new forces would be an important factor in tipping the scales of victory. On the city gate tower, Wuxia raised his saber and swung it down. Another White Russian soldier was killed at his feet. Covered in blood, his killing intent caused the White Russian soldiers on the other side to involuntarily retreat. Using this time, he looked at the situation on the battlefield and his brows furrowed. At this point, all of the new army soldiers had joined the battle. Even the logistic soldiers and medics were no exception. However, they were only temporarily undefeated. And now, Ivan had sent another 20,000 White Russian soldiers. With this force, he could foresee that the new army's defeat was inevitable. Sixth young master, I'm afraid I won't be able to see you again in the future. I only hope that you can take revenge for this general. Before I die, I will definitely kill a few more White Russian soldiers to prove that the dignity of the 5-star army is inviolable. Wuxia roared, "Fight for the dignity of the 5-star army." This shout quickly attracted the attention of the other soldiers. Immediately, the other division commanders and officers also shouted, "Fight for the dignity of the 5-star army." In that instant, the morale of the 5-star army soldiers who had been suppressed began to rise, forcing the White Russian soldiers who had a certain advantage to retreat. However, as more White Russian reinforcements arrived, this momentum was finally suppressed and pushed back. Not only that, but with the addition of the 20,000 White Russian soldiers, the 5-star army was suppressed to the point where they could not raise their heads. After more than 4 hours of bitter fighting, many of the warriors found it difficult to even lift their swords, let alone injure or kill their enemies. Does the heavens want my third army to die? Wuxia, who also felt his arms go numb, couldn't help but roar after cutting down another White Russian soldier. Following his shout, a boundless green light suddenly appeared on the east side of Toph City. Then it quickly approached the battlefield at a speed visible to the naked eye. What is that? Wuxia wasn't the only one who saw this scene. Many soldiers and White Russian soldiers also saw it, but because they were too far away, many people didn't know what it was. Ivan also saw this scene, but his face was filled with confusion. He looked at General Vanya and asked, "What's that? A green light that can move, what is it?" "I don't know." General Vanya shook his head with a confused expression. On the city wall, Wuxia also didn't understand what was going on. However, 2nd Division Commander Chunyang killed 2 White Russian soldiers and came to his side. "General, do you think that is our uniform?" "Uniform?" Wuxia's eyes widened when he heard this. He used to have a green uniform with the rank of senior colonel, and he looked very handsome in it. However, that was a few years ago. Ever since he entered the depths of this area, his uniform had been damaged. Without new uniforms, it became a collection and was stored away. After that, he didn't know where it ended up, and it became a memory in the depths of his heart. Now that Chunyang reminded him, a memory that he hadn't seen for a long time instantly popped up in his mind. When he saw the green light getting closer and closer, Wuxia shouted excitedly, "Yes, that must be the color of our uniform. That is our reinforcements, our reinforcements are here." As he shouted, Wuxia didn't forget to wave his hands and shout. His appearance quickly attracted the attention of the other soldiers. The originally low morale and weak army seemed to have been rejuvenated after hearing the commander's words. Suddenly they were filled with energy. When they raised their swords, they found that they were no longer as weak as before. The reinforcements were here, which meant that there was hope. There was also meaning in persevering. At this moment, everyone's potential was stimulated, and they were filled with energy again like hungry men who had seen delicious food. The soldiers of the 3rd star were like middle-aged old men who had been rejuvenated. They actually managed to push the White Russians back dozens of meters in a very short period of time, and had a 50-50 standoff on the city gate tower. On the open ground outside the city, Yellow was fighting a bloody battle with the White Russians with bloodshot eyes. In 4 hours, more than half of his cavalry division had been killed or injured. If it weren't for the strict military discipline, and if it weren't for the fact that he was still persevering on the battlefield, the army would have been defeated a long time ago. When he shouted to fight for the dignity of the 5-star army on the city gate tower, Yella had already decided to fight to the death. Since he thought that killing 1 was enough for him and killing 2 was enough for him, he was ready to die. It was also at this moment that he saw the green tide, and he saw the appearance of hope. "Comrades, our reinforcements are here. Our reinforcements are here. Hold on a little longer and victory will be right in front of us." The appearance of hope made Yella seem like a different person. His body seemed to be a lot more nimble while riding on his warhorse. Whether it was on the city gate or below, the the Third Star Army began to counterattack and brought pressure to the White Russians. Ivan, who was standing in the middle of the army, felt all of this. He also saw the approaching green tide and knew that Wu Sheng's reinforcements must have arrived. Where did their reinforcements come from? And they're all cavalry? Could it be a trap set by the Golden Horde? General Vanya asked with a puzzled expression. No, the cavalry of the Golden Horde doesn't have such a uniform. It should be the 5-star army. Ivan's expression was a little ugly. He didn't expect that Wu Sheng's reinforcements would appear so close to victory. He saw that there were still 5,000 soldiers behind him. 1,000 of them were on horseback and 4,000 paces. This was the last of his strength. He clenched his teeth and revealed a determined gaze as he said, "Their reinforcements are not that many, less than 20,000. We have cannons in our hands and can completely give them a head-on blow. This way victory and defeat will not be decided yet." Chapter 14-16. Ivan didn't want to give up just like that. In his eyes, Wu Sheng was an outstanding general. It was a blessing to have such a person as a friend. If he was an enemy, then he had to be eliminated. Otherwise, it would always be a big problem. The war had already reached this point. If he gave up now, he really didn't know when he would be able to surround the other party again. He might as well go all out and put all his forces into it. It was just the right time to test the combat power of the so-called 5-star army. He put all the 2,000 reserve troops in place and all the cannoneers were in place. They began to adjust the direction of the cannons. They were just waiting for the green tide to enter the range to give them a good show. The green tide coming from afar was the world's first cavalry army. Led by Commander Jianghu, they were led by 2nd Division Lu Duo and 4th Division Su Ku. In addition to the military guard regiment, there were a total of 18,000 people. 1 man and 3 horses, led by Deputy Division Commander Yi Dai, finally arrived outside Tove City at the last moment. Still far away, the chaotic scene outside the city fell into the eyes of Tianhu and the generals. At the same time, with the help of binoculars, the 20 cannons of the White Russian army were also clearly seen. They had already learned from Yi Dai that the White Russian army was good at using firearms, and the caliber of the cannons in their hands was not small. It was precisely because of this that they gradually became evenly matched with the old power of the Golden Horde. Cannons? They can deal with the Mongolian cavalry, but they are still a little lacking if they want to deal with the world's first cavalry army. Tianhu's eyes revealed a look of contempt, but when he gave the order as he rode, he was very cautious. He said to Hu Helu, who was already the head of the guards, "Inform everyone that the other party has cannons. Don't let them hit them. Tell the soldiers to disperse and advance. Change the arrow formation to a 3-3 formation. These are solid cannons. They won't explode, so it's not a big deal. Also, inform 2nd Division Lu Duo to bring people to destroy the enemy's artillery position. Don't let them stand there and make people hate them." "Yes, Commander." After Hu Helu agreed, he quickly went to send the message. Not long after, the cavalrymen who were originally running in a group dispersed and ran forward in groups of 3. The change in the formation of the world's #1 cavalry army made it difficult for the White Russian artillerymen who were adjusting the direction of the cannons. This was the first time they had seen such a scattered formation. Without a concentrated enemy, even if the cannons fired, the casualties would be limited. Moreover, each cannon shell was expensive to make. It was not worth it to waste them like this. Fight, don't be afraid of wasting. Ivan's expression turned ugly. He didn't expect the 5-star army to react so quickly. Especially the cavalry, they actually changed their formation while running. Not only was there no chaos, but they were also very orderly. Just based on this point, they were not any weaker than the 3rd-star army. The stronger the army, the more Ivan couldn't let them survive. No matter what, he still had the initiative on the battlefield. The 3rd-star army was about to be destroyed. As long as he blocked the reinforcements from the 5-star army, after dealing with the 3rd-star army, he wouldn't let a single person from the 5-star army escape. Pass down the order, split the cavalry into half to block the enemy's attack. Order the infantry to attack faster and finish off the 3rd-star army as soon as possible. Ivan didn't have any intention of backing down. He was even prepared to eliminate the reinforcements from the 5-star army. Although the appearance of the reinforcements was out of his expectations, there were only 10,000 of them. He didn't put them in his eyes. On the battlefield, he still had at least 50,000 soldiers. On the other hand, the new 3rd Army only had about 10,000 soldiers. Even with the addition of 20,000 reinforcements, he still had a huge advantage in terms of military strength. What was there to be afraid of? Ivan, who was determined to finish off the Third Star Army, didn't realize the existence of danger. He also didn't know the strength of the enemy in front of him. On the contrary, if they were on the grasslands, mentioning the number 1 cavalry army in the world of the 5-star army, many opponents would be afraid before they even fought. They wouldn't be able to calmly fight to the death like this. Ivan's order was passed down, and the artillery was ready to fire. Some of the cavalry on the battlefield also adjusted their direction and went straight to Jianghu's army in the distance. Good. Seeing that there were enemy cavalry blocking the road ahead, Jianghu's face flashed with excitement. This time, after attacking the Far East with Yang Qindong, he didn't have a chance to fight to his heart's content. The opponents he encountered were so weak that they couldn't withstand a single blow. He hoped that the White Russian army wouldn't disappoint him this time. On the battlefield, generals hoped that their opponents would be weaker so that their chances of winning would be higher. It was rare for Jianghu to think like this, but it was enough to prove his confidence in the cavalry under his command. The green tide finally entered the battlefield from the northeast under the eyes of tens of thousands of people. What greeted them was 20 iron bullets. They came from afar, leaping towards the number 1 cavalry army. Faced with the roar of the cannons, even the well-trained war horses of the White Russian army seemed a little restless. However, Jianghu's army didn't have any reaction. Their charging speed didn't decrease in the slightest. Most of the soldiers didn't even try to dodge. They just pressed their bodies against the backs of their horses to reduce the wind resistance. Under the 3-3 system, the effect of the solid cannonballs was very limited. Except for a few soldiers who were unlucky and were hit by the iron bullets, most of the cavalry charged towards the White Russian army without slowing down. The distance between the two sides was rapidly closing. 800 meters, 600 meters, 300 meters, 100 meters, 80 meters. Seeing that the battle was about to begin, many of the White Russian cavalrymen had already raised their sabers above their heads and were ready to chop down. The soldiers of the world's number 1 cavalry army who were lying on their horses finally made their move. At some point, a crossbow had appeared in their hands. Then, when they were less than 40 meters away from the White Russian cavalrymen, they pulled the trigger and fired the Big Dipper crossbow. One arrow after another flew towards the target. With the continuous development of the steelmaking industry, the Crimson City arsenal had modified the Big Dipper crossbow. Not only were the springs more powerful, even the arrows had become sharper. After testing, they could break through 4 centimeters of planks within 80 meters, 6 centimeters of planks within 50 meters, and 5 centimeters of armor within 40 meters without a problem. This time, Jianghu's Big Dipper crossbow had used such sharp arrows. When the arrows were fired, at such a close distance and without any warning, the sound of arrows piercing flesh could be heard. Following this, the White Russian army fell from their war horses one after another. Because the war horses were too fast, it was impossible to see what had happened from the distance. After the two horses collided, the White Russian army fell from their war horses and collapsed on the ground. There were more than 7,000 White Russian cavalry, but in just a single exchange, nearly half of them had fallen. The remaining 3,000 or so cavalry could only defend under the attacks of the number 1 cavalry army's 3x3 formation. They were unable to attack at all. What happened? Ivan's eyes were wide open. Just as he was waiting for the 5-star army's reinforcements to be blocked or even heavily injured, he saw his own cavalry falling from their horses as if they had been possessed. Like dumplings, they fell to the ground one after another. This completely unexpected outcome had caught Ivan off guard. His expression was no longer playful and confident, but rather nervous and angry. "Young master, we should leave quickly. These Han people are too powerful. They have already broken through our cavalry formation and are rushing over." Seeing that the situation was not good, Vanya hurriedly shouted. Ivan was the favorite son of the Grand Duke of Blindness and the most likely descendant to inherit his legacy. If something really happened to him here, not only would he be punished, but even the family behind him would be punished and killed without leaving a single one alive. Vanya was extremely nervous as he felt threatened. On the contrary, Ivan wasn't afraid at all. On the contrary, he drew his saber and shouted, "Don't be afraid, the enemy's numbers are inferior to ours. We just need to charge and destroy their attacks. Victory will still belong to us in the end. Come, charge with this general." Seeing that the situation on the battlefield wasn't good, not only did Ivan not run, he even shouted and wanted to charge forward. Vanya wasn't going to let that happen. He hurriedly gave a few bodyguards beside him a look. Then, 4 cavalrymen appeared behind Ivan. One of them raised his right hand and struck the back of Ivan's head. Ivan's excited shouts immediately stopped and he fainted. All cavalrymen retreat and protect young master. All infantry stay behind to stop the enemy. Without Ivan, Vanya became the highest-ranking general here. His words became the new order. The bravery of the five-star army's reinforcements shocked Vanya. At the same time, it also made him feel the existence of danger. As the representative of Pskov city in the Rossi Principality, Vanya was able to survive until now not because of his bravery, but because of his amazing foresight. He knew when to make the right decision. Reality proved that he was right. The five-star army's cavalrymen, who were still several miles away, arrived in front of him in the blink of an eye. They rushed into the artillery formation in front of the city as if there was no resistance. After a series of slashes with their sabers, the artillery soldiers were defeated and left behind a pile of corpses. Then, a portion of the cavalrymen led by a general wearing a white cloak went straight to the center of the army. However, Vanya had already escaped with the unconscious Ivan. He left behind thousands of soldiers to form a long snake formation to block the pursuit of the five-star army. Chapter 14-17. Vanya immediately took the young master and fled. Due to the urgency of the matter, he didn't even leave behind a proper sentence. This was the White Russian soldiers who had bitterly stayed behind. Without a commander, the other generals didn't know what to do next. It was inevitable that a trace of chaos would appear in the army. At this moment, Jianghu and the others launched a fierce attack. They used the Big Dipper crossbows to shoot at the enemies from afar, while they used the Divine Sabers to slash at the enemies at close range. In just half an hour, the first deserter appeared in the White Russian army, followed by a second, a third, and an increasing number. The valiant strength displayed by the world's #1 cavalry army quickly frightened the White Russian soldiers. When they discovered that their opponents were extremely strong, ferocious, and equipped with excellent equipment, they were far from being a match for them. Wuxia gave a loud shout and launched an all-out counterattack from the center of the city. The White Russian army's morale finally hit rock bottom, and they began to disobey orders and flee in a large area. The commander wasn't present, and there were no unified orders. In addition, the world's #1 cavalry army was so valiant that no one could stop them wherever they went. Although they still had the advantage in terms of numbers, no one was able to form a unified resistance in a situation where the morale of the army was low. Even the White Russian cavalry that was fighting with the Nuzan cavalry left behind thousands of corpses and fled. Victory? Victory. Seeing that the Russian army had already escaped from the battlefield, and only his brothers were left outside the city walls, Wuxia suddenly shouted. Then with a plop, he knelt on the ground and fainted. After fighting for such a long time, under great psychological pressure, he suddenly relaxed at this moment. Finally, his body could no longer hold it in and he fainted. 4 hours later, Ivan finally woke up in the carriage. When he opened his eyes, he discovered that Tov city was no longer there. He was sitting in a simple carriage. He hurriedly shouted, Men. Young master, you're awake. The curtains of the carriage were lifted and a head popped out. Who else could it be but Vanya? When Ivan saw Vanya, his head was still throbbing with pain. He only remembered that he was commanding the army on the battlefield just a moment ago. How did he end up in a carriage? He asked in confusion. Where are we? Young master, we are returning to Moscow, Vanya explained while observing Ivan's expression. Return to the city? Ivan felt that his head was not as painful as before, so he asked, Why did you return to the city? Was Wuxia's third corps destroyed? Evidently, that blow had indeed stunned Ivan, so much so that he still couldn't recall what had just happened. Vanya had no choice but to explain everything that had happened outside Tov city. When he talked about how he had no choice but to knock Ivan out, his voice became much softer. This kind of action was somewhat disrespectful to his superior. If Ivan insisted on making an issue out of this matter, he was afraid that he would suffer a lot. When he continued to talk about how the cavalry of the five-star army defeated the White Russians very quickly, he still had a lingering fear in his heart. He clearly didn't expect the cavalry to be so powerful and capable of fighting. Ivan was completely awake now. After listening to the entire process of the battle, he wasn't too angry. After all, as the future Emperor Ivan, he still had this bit of tolerance. However, he still had a gloomy look on his face. He was worried about how the cavalry of the five-star army was so powerful that they weren't even afraid of cannons. Although the cannons were solid shells that had a long range and weren't lethal, the cannons had a short range. However, the fact that the cavalry wasn't afraid of cannons and their horses weren't even affected by the cannons was enough to prove that this army had seen cannons before. General Vanya, this young master won't argue with you about this matter this time. However, there definitely won't be a next time. Ivan pretended to be angry as he said this. He was also reminding the other party that he couldn't be knocked out again. Thank you for your understanding, young master. This one won't dare to do it again. Vanya let out a long sigh of relief. No matter what, this one was finally over. All right. Now, immediately send out scouts to keep an eye on the 5-star army. We need to know their every move and their whereabouts. Ivan nodded and then made arrangements. He had already thought it through. No matter how powerful the enemy was, this was still the territory of the Ross Duchy. He would never allow other forces to run rampant and do whatever they wanted here. He wanted to go back and see his father-in-law. He wanted to ask for reinforcements and completely defeat and annihilate the 5-star army. Bulgar City. The northernmost city of the Golden Horde. As usual, the city gates opened in the early morning, and the number of people coming and going gradually increased. It was as lively as some of the cities of the Yangtze. The only difference was that the people coming and going here often led horses or other livestock. In this economically backward nation, bartering was still very popular among the people. On the contrary, the use of silver was sometimes limited. Behind a mound outside the city, Beta Persei put down a pair of binoculars in his hand, then turned sideways and whispered to Yang Qindong, "Young master, everything in the city is normal. Our people have already sneaked in. It seems that the other party didn't take any precautions." Lying on his back next to Beta Persei was Yang Qindong. At this time he was holding an unknown grass stick in his mouth and looking at the blue sky above his head. Today's weather was good. The sky was blue, and there were a few cotton candy-like white clouds floating in the sky. It gave off a poetic and picturesque feeling. Jianghu's telegram had arrived yesterday. He had already joined forces with Commander Wuxia. Considering that the army had suffered heavy losses and had more wounded, they were heading to a Russian city called Oksino. They wanted to take the city and use it as a base for the army to rest and recuperate. In the telegram, Jianghu explained that the White Russians had cannons and muskets. He also said that although the enemy's cannons were solid shells, they could shoot up to 3 miles away. In terms of range, they were already the strongest enemy the 5-star Corps had ever come into contact with. He asked if they could send a cold front unit to help them suppress the enemy's firepower on the battlefield in order to suppress them in the future. Yang Qindong had already mentally prepared himself for the fact that the White Russian army had firearms, and they were relatively powerful. How could they be easy to deal with if they could stand up to the Golden Horde when it was at its peak? How to make up for this gap was far from a problem that could be solved with the help of Wu Sheng's Third Army. Although Yang Qindong was mentally prepared, the fact that the enemy's cannons could hit more than 3 miles away still greatly exceeded his expectations. At this moment he could see the difference between the great Ming dynasty and the other countries. To think that they were still living in their own beautiful dreams and really thought that they were a great and powerful country. Look, the enemy's cannons can hit several times farther than yours. If they really fought, would you still be a match for them? In history, the Rossi kingdom had been suppressed by the Mongols too much and needed time to recuperate. Furthermore, their territory was large enough and their population was not large, so they did not have such great ambitions. Otherwise, they would have been able to push their way over from land and end the rule of the great Ming dynasty without even needing to do anything. As he sighed in his heart, Yang Qindong felt even more pressure. Outside of the great Ming dynasty, the Western countries were undergoing all kinds of reforms and rising. If he did not take advantage of this period of time to destroy them before they became fully powerful, it would be even more difficult to deal with them in the future. He was pressed for time. Yang Qindong would naturally fulfill the request in Tianhu's telegram. He had already sent a telegram to the army headquarters in Chichen City when he left the Far East region and asked them to send an elite Cold Vanguard division to help him. Due to the importance of the Golden Horde in the Russian Empire, they had sent the elite 2nd Division of the Cold Vanguard Division, Xiaofeng. Through the telegram, he knew that they had already entered the Arrow region and were not far behind him. He sent out a telegram and asked Division Commander Xiaofeng to send a regiment to meet up with Commander Tianhu. The reason Yang Qindong only sent one regiment was because he had his own plans. Faced with two enemies that could be described as huge, he would definitely not attack both sides with only 100,000 soldiers. He wanted to fight them one by one. The conclusion he came to was to attack the Golden Horde first, while the Russian Empire would focus on defense. If it was only to defend the city, a cold vanguard division with their cannons and muskets should be enough to stabilize the situation. At the same time, he had to speed up his attack on the Golden Horde. His first target was the city of Bulgar. A while ago, the Golden Horde had sent troops to New Xia City from here, destroying Wu Sheng's years of hard work. He would avenge this grudge on behalf of his subordinates. Considering the lack of information at that time, the appearance of the five-star army should not have attracted much attention in the Golden Horde's territory. What he needed to do now was to take over as many cities as possible before the news was made public. He needed to create a place to store all kinds of supplies and lay down a sufficient foundation for his attack on the Golden Horde. Now that he had a military objective, the next step was to implement it. After discussing with Shibi and the others, they suggested that they should infiltrate Pyoga before the battle. After all, most of the people in the city were Mongols. There were also a small number of White Russians. In the new Second Army there were quite a number of such soldiers. Infiltrating the city would not be a problem. This would allow them to coordinate with the enemy from the inside and outside. Chapter 14-18. One of the reasons for making such a military decision was that Yang Qindong wanted a complete Bulgar city, not a ruined city. Not only that, he also wanted the Mongolian soldiers in the city. Considering the long journey, if the country sent troops here for everything, the losses would be too great. If he could get a Mongolian army here for his own use, the problem of insufficient military strength could be easily solved. While he was thinking about this, Beta Persei looked at Yang Qindong with a look of seeking his opinion as if to say, "Young master, when are we going to make a move? Say something. Why are you looking at me? Just follow the plan." Yang Qindong rolled his eyes at Beta Persei and turned his head to the side. He knew that the other party was asking for his opinion. After all, according to the rules, once a military plan was formulated, even a leader like him could not casually intervene or change it. The reason why second young Master Yang was still looking at him like that was because he wanted to personally go to the battlefield. Speaking of which, this person was really wrong to be his family general. He should be leading the army to gallop on the battlefield and expand the territory. Yang Qindong did not agree to let Beta Persei follow the army. Swords had no eyes, and now there was no one more convenient by his side. He did not want to see anything happen to Beta Persei. There were many things that he had to do himself. Beta Persei, who did not get permission to fight, looked a little wronged. As a man in his 30s, he pretended to be a wronged little wife. It was difficult for the burly Beta Persei. But when he made a few consecutive actions that made him want to vomit, he found that the young master had turned around again and did not even look at him. He knew that his performance was in vain. The young master had made up his mind not to allow him to participate in the battle. He could only put away his wronged face and said to Badao Jiang, the deputy captain of the Black Cavalry Brigade who was watching the show, "Go and pass on the young master's order. Everything will be done according to the previous plan." When Ba Daojiang saw Yang Er's darkened face, he quickly put away his sinister smile and agreed with a serious expression. Then he turned around and left. According to the military plan, a part of the new Second Army's infantry division and a part of the foreign Russian army were the first to sneak into Bulgaria. The infantry division's commander, Yang Chunfeng, was a student of the Yang Family Academy in Qilian City. He was a standard Han Chinese, but he learned Mongolian and Russian well in the academy. In the final military thesis examination he was ranked at the top. After graduation he went directly to the army and started as a platoon leader. Along the way he made countless contributions and became the commander of the new Second Army's infantry division. This person was rough but meticulous, and he was proficient in 3 languages. It was reassuring to leave this kind of infiltration mission to him. The commander of the White Russian division was given to Nikolaev. This person's qualifications and ability were naturally not enough, but he had a bitter background. He could unite most of the White Russians and he was very loyal to Yang Qindong. The people of his tribe were all in the Far East region's All City. There was no need to worry about such people rebelling, so he was given the position of acting commander. Fortunately, Ahuli surrendered. This person had been a great Khan before, and Yang Qindong also gave him the opportunity to choose his own path. After he understood the structure and glorious history of the 5-star army, he finally decided to join the army and was directly appointed as the deputy commander. He cooperated with Nikolaev to manage the White Russian division. With Ahuli's help, the military had been greatly supplemented, and Yang Qindong could be more at ease. The next step was to let the other party undergo the baptism of war. It would be much easier to obtain an elite army after a lot of tempering. Naturally, there would be losses in this process, and a lot of people would be eliminated like sand being washed away by waves. This was the cruelty of war. This was the only way to obtain elite soldiers. This was the reason why the merciful could not command an army. Inside the Bulgar city, Yang Chuanfeng's subordinates, Nikoliv, Ahuli, and the others had already infiltrated the city. They either pretended to be passers-by or people who came to seek refuge. There were also people dressed in ragged clothes who pretended to be refugees. They were hiding in various parts of the city, waiting to coordinate with the main army from the inside. As the largest city in the north of the Golden Horde, not only would there be white Russian merchants here, but there would also be some people from small tribes in the nearby forests who would come here to buy things. There were also people who did not have anything to eat, and those who could not survive would come here to beg. They were all called refugees. It was because of this that the population of the city was not fixed. Perhaps one day there would be more refugees, and the city's population would increase. The Mongolian soldiers who were in charge of security here were used to this. Of course, this had a lot to do with the pride and arrogance in their hearts. No matter what, this place belonged to the Golden Horde, and no one had ever tried to attack them here. Using this loophole, no matter if it was Yang Chunfeng, Nikoliv, or Ahuli, when they entered the city, they did not attract any attention. Ahuli, on the other hand, had a look of reluctance, especially when he looked at Nikoliv, who was dressed in noble clothes. He said unhappily, "Look at you, it's a waste of good clothes on you." Ahuli looked down on Nikoliv. This was a form of racial prejudice. At that time, most Mongolians looked down on the White Russians. After all, they had suppressed them for more than 200 years. But how could Nikoliv look up to Ahuli? Hearing these complaints, Nikoliv snorted and said, "I am now the acting commander, and you are only the deputy commander. According to the rank, I am higher than you, and I have to listen to the commander's orders. Don't you know that?" This time Ahuli did not say anything. He just snorted to show his dissatisfaction. He was willing to join the 5-star army not because of Nikoliv. He really saw many Mongolian brothers in the 5-star army, and he heard from them that many Mongolians were living better and better under King Wunan of Damyang. As mentioned before, Ahuli was a Mongolian Khan with his own ideas. He was a leader who wanted to let the people under his rule live a better life. To achieve this goal, he had made a lot of efforts and made a lot of concessions. For example, in the original Great Crow City, there were many White Russians there, but they had never seen him bully anyone. This was proof. He had ideas and made efforts, but the effect was not good. Later he thought about it, and it was because he was not big enough. Now Yang Chendong was here. He had more ideas than him and he did things better. More importantly, he was strong enough. Not only did he have a vast territory, but he was also very rich. Ahuli, who knew all this, did not mind hitching a ride. His request was very simple. He wanted the Mongolians to live a stable life and not have to worry about food. For this goal he almost lost his life. Now he was just one of Yang Chendong's subordinates. What was so unacceptable about it? Ahuli surrendered to Yang Chendong, not Nikoliv. Especially when he found that Nikoliv had a deep prejudice against the Mongolians, he would often talk back to him. He was venting his dissatisfaction, and also reminding Nikoliv not to be prejudiced against the Mongolians. After being a Khan for so many years, he knew when to stop. This time, after reminding Nikoliv, he did not say anything. Instead, he stared at the Mongolian general's residence across the street. He had already asked around. This was the residence of the Bulgar general. If he could control this place as soon as he made a move, then everything would be much easier. After noticing Ahuli's gaze, Nikoliv's expression became much more serious. "I say, Vice Division Commander, when we make a move, can you guarantee that you can control this place?" There was a trace of uncertainty in his voice. After all, Nikoliv was only someone from a small tribe. Although he was very brave, his experience was limited. Compared to before, when he was just a poor boy, there was too much of a difference between him and this so-called general. Where did his confidence come from? On the other hand, Ahuli's face was indifferent. He was someone who had been a Khan. What kind of situation had he not seen before? It was just a general of a city. Naturally, he would not be scared. "It's fine. When we make a move, I will be the first to rush in. You just need to bring people to guard the outside and prevent anyone from escaping." Okay. Hearing such a promise, Nikoliv nodded in relief. Although he hated the Mongols deep in his bones, if it were not for them, his tribe would not have to live such a poor life. However, he was still very confident in Ahuli's ability. Since he said so, there should not be any problems. Nikolaev, who was pretending to be a rich white Russian merchant, walked slowly on this street. From time to time, he would stop in front of some open-air stalls and ask about the price of some goods. It seemed that there was nothing wrong with it, but in fact, his heart was in a mess. This was the first time he had carried out such a mission. In the past, he only thought that when two armies fought, they would pull apart their stances and compete with courage and perseverance. However, after joining the 5-star army, he realized that even if it was a war, there was a very special way. If he used it well, he could win with fewer people and win with the weak. Like a studious student, Nikolaev studied with all his might. It was because of this spirit and his innate affinity that he was able to become friends with many White Russians. Yang Chendong appointed him as a substitute teacher. The panicked Nikolaev forced himself to calm down. However, his panicked eyes still betrayed him. From time to time, he would look at the general's residence in the distance. At the same time, he kept asking himself, why hasn't the main force of the 5-star army attacked yet? As if they felt his call, the street suddenly became chaotic. Many Mongol soldiers were running towards this street. Obviously, something urgent must have happened. They were here to report. Chapter 14:19. Stop them. Out of instinct, Nicholas shouted to the people on both sides of the street. Then hundreds of strong White Russian men rushed out. Unknowingly, they had sharp cavalry swords in their hands. Seeing more and more soldiers gathering around him, Nicholas couldn't help but let out a sigh of relief. Then he thought of Ahu. He wanted to see if Ahu had already made his move. After all, he didn't have enough people with him. They wouldn't be able to hold on for long. When he turned around, he realized that the door of the great general's residence was already wide open and he could vaguely hear the clashing sounds of swords and sabers coming from within the residence. This meant that Ahuli had already made his move. Nicholas heaved a sigh of relief. Then he turned to the White Russian soldiers who were gathering around him and said, "Hold on, don't let anyone rush into the general's mansion." As Nicholas spoke, he took a cavalry sword from one of the soldiers. Then he charged with them towards a group of 50 Mongolian soldiers. They were now warriors and they were no longer the rootless trees from before. Recently, they had also gone through the training of battle formations. Even though they had not fully grasped it, they still managed to cut down the 50 Mongolian cavaliers with their advantage in numbers. After a quarter of an hour, only the White Russian warriors led by Nikolai were left standing on the street. Clean up the battlefield, finish off those who should be dealt with. Treat the injured soldiers immediately. Thinking about the battlefield knowledge that the soldiers of the 5-star army had taught him, Nicholas shouted out. After that, the soldiers started to get busy again. Screams of agony sounded out again. Those were the screams of the Mongol soldiers who hadn't died yet. Some of the soldiers took out the bandages they carried with them and wrapped them around the wounds of their injured comrades. Due to the limited conditions, they could only stop the bleeding first. After the battle, there would naturally be medical personnel from the 5-star army to treat them. Just as these were done, the sound of horse hooves came from afar. Nicholas looked over and his face turned ugly. It's actually the Mongolian cavalry. There are about 80 of them. Looking at his side, there were less than 70 soldiers who could still fight with light injuries. In terms of numbers, they were already inferior to the enemy, not to mention infantry against cavalry, which was a natural disadvantage. "Master, what should we do?" A few Russian officers asked Nikolai nervously. "Don't panic. Set up obstacles. Don't let the cavalry rush over so quickly." Nicholas looked to the left and right of the street, and his gaze landed on the wooden boards of the stalls. He pretended to be calm and said, "The chaos just now had already scared away the peddlers and merchants. Many people didn't even take their goods with them because they were afraid of being implicated." After receiving the order, the White Russian soldiers immediately ran to the left and right, taking out everything that could be lifted from both sides of the road and throwing them on the road to form a simple barrier. He knew that these things wouldn't last long, but he had no other choice but to do this. Right now, he could only hope that the main force of the 5-star army would arrive quickly. He hoped that Ahuli would be able to deal with the general's manor quickly. At the very least, it would be much safer to hide there. The Mongolian cavaliers who came from afar had already seen the obstacles on the road and also saw the corpses of their own soldiers. Their expressions changed drastically and they became very ugly. One of the young generals said angrily, "Release the arrows. Kill these White Russian bastards." After receiving the order, the Mongolian cavalry took out the bows on their backs and started to knock the arrows. Following this, the sound of arrows piercing through the air rang out as they flew towards the White Russian soldiers. "Find a place to hide, quick!" Nicholas shouted as he hid behind a thick wooden board. Just as he finished doing that, the arrows fell and hit the wooden board, creating a series of banging sounds. As a race that grew up on horseback, the Mongolian cavalry's archery skills were very high, and there were very few who could match them. When this wave of arrows came, many of the White Russian soldiers were hit because they didn't hide well enough. There were also some who didn't find a suitable place to hide, and the arrows still pierced through their bodies. Cries of agony rang out around him, which meant that more and more White Russian soldiers had lost their lives. Hearing this, Nikolaev bit his lips. His right hand gripped the saber so tightly that it turned white. After a few rounds of arrows, the Mongolian cavalry had arrived in front of the obstacles. Following this, the cavalry at the front dismounted and started to move the objects. There were also some bleeding corpses. Kill? Feeling the Mongolian cavalry's aura getting closer and closer, Nicholas looked through the gap between the cover and saw that the distance between them was less than 6 meters. He knew that this was the best time to counterattack, so he shouted and led the 30 or so White Russian soldiers who weren't injured to charge out. The sudden battle cry did not cause the Mongolian soldiers to panic. On the contrary, one of them even smiled savagely and charged at Nicholas with a machete. An instant later, the two sides clashed, and the cruel battle of life and death began. As both sides fought, the Mongolian cavalry were unable to shoot their arrows. They simply dismounted and charged over. They wanted to surround Nicholas and the others and kill them all. They did not want to let a single one of them escape. Facing the Mongolian soldiers getting closer and closer, Nicholas only turned around to look at the general's manner before giving up on the idea of entering. He did not want to be looked down on by a huli, and he did not want to be a burden to him. "Soldiers, let's go all out. Our names have already been registered. Even if we die in this battle, our families and people in Bugnam of Gojoseon will take care of us. Even if we die, what is there to fear?" Seeing that more than 10 of his brothers had died in the battle in a short period of time, Nicholas knew that they were doomed this time. Therefore he simply gave up on his fantasy and roared loudly with the thought that killing one was enough to break even, and killing two was a win for him. After joining the 5-star army, they had to register. Even if they were just auxiliary soldiers, this way if something happened to them, their heirs would be able to receive compensation from the 5-star army. This was a form of protection for everyone, and they would not have to worry about what happened after they died on the battlefield. In the past, when there was a war between tribes, if one died, then one's wife and children would become slaves. Now, they were people with an organization. If something happened, not only would their families be able to receive compensation, if someone dared to bully the family of a martyr, they would just have to find an official and someone would support them. It was because of these policies that no one had ever heard of or even thought about before that when Yang Qindong said that he wanted to establish a division outside of Russia, the enthusiasm of the applicants far exceeded everyone's expectations. These people were carefully selected, and those who were not in their prime were not accepted. Otherwise, not to mention 20,000 people, even an army of 50,000 could be gathered. Hearing Nikolaev shout, the remaining dozen people also had a look of determination to die. Since everything had been arranged, what else was there to worry about? They would just kill. As the saying went, the soft feared the hard feared the unreasonable, and the unreasonable feared those who did not care about their lives. When the dozen Russian soldiers became fugitives, facing the Mongol soldiers who were many times their number, they no longer defended. Instead, they continuously attacked, and the momentum of the Mongol soldiers became sluggish, and they could not help but take a few steps back. Only then did they avoid the Russian soldiers. Come, isn't it just death? Who's afraid of who? Nikolaev borrowed the momentum from before to cut down 2 Mongolian soldiers. At this moment, his momentum was at its peak, and when he spoke, his voice was a bit louder. "Lunatics, a bunch of lunatics. Don't waste words with them, just shoot them to death." When the Mongol soldiers saw that Nikolaev and his men were not afraid of death and wanted to drag them down with them, they shook their heads and retreated to open up the distance between them. At the same time, they took out their bows and arrows and prepared to shoot. Seeing the Mongol soldiers take out their bows and arrows, Nikolaev was shocked and quickly tried to find cover. However, in such a short period of time, where could he hide? Just as he thought that he was going to die, a voice suddenly shouted, "Put down your weapons immediately, otherwise your general will die in front of you." The one who shouted was Ahuli. At this moment, he had already walked out of the general's residence, and in his right hand he was holding the Mongol general. In that short period of time he had brought his own personal guards into the residence, and after a fierce battle, he had captured the enemy general. It was only because Bulgar city had not been in a war for many years that there were less than 50 soldiers defending the residence that Ahuli was able to deal with them in such a short period of time, saving Nikolaev's life. With their general being held hostage, the faces of the Mongol soldiers turned ugly. When they saw that the saber on their general's neck was about to be pulled at any moment, they had no choice but to put down their bows. Many thanks. Nikolaev, who was still in shock, walked to Ahuli's side and said in an unnatural manner, "If you really want to thank me, why don't you let me be your division commander?" Ahuli suddenly made a request. Nikolaev was stunned at first, but he quickly reacted and shook his head. The acting division commander is personally appointed by Bugnam of Gojosian. If you have the ability, go find Bugnam of Gojosian to change your military order. Don't worry, the position of division commander will be mine sooner or later, Ahuli said without a care. The two of them were still bickering, but after what happened just now, it was obvious that their relationship had become much closer. In the words of the future, they had formed a revolutionary friendship. Chapter 1420. With the Mongolian general under control, Yang Chunfeng led the 5-star army hidden in the city and took down the unguarded city gate. Without a unified command, the Mongolian army fell into chaos. Then, a large number of new Second Army cavalry soldiers rushed into the city of Bulgar. From then on, the city was surnamed Yang, forever separated from the territory of the Golden Horde. By the time Yang Qindong entered the city under the protection of the Black Cavalry, the security of the city had returned to normal. With strict military rules, no soldier dared to disturb the people. When the city was taken, only the Mongolian soldiers were hurt. The city is not big, but the population is not small. Yang Qindong walked on the street looking around casually, then shook his head gently. Yes, I heard that Bulgar is the largest city in the north of the Golden Horde. Many people living nearby often come here to exchange for what they need. Beta Persei told Yang Qindong some of the things he learned before. It's a pity that the Mongolians seem to be used to a nomadic lifestyle. They don't know how to make use of such good conditions. Haha, but this time we are here, everything is different. Watch how I build a big city here. A sufficient population and abundant untapped resources. All of these were boundless wealth in Yang Qindong's hands. Beta Persei naturally believed Yang Qindong's words. He nodded heavily and said flatteringly, "Of course, who is the young master? There is only one such person in the world." Yang Qindong, who was elated by this sentence, laughed and said, "Well, young heir, you're so good at complimenting people. Well, tell me, do you have something to ask of the young master?" He was in a good mood and also joked. This. Beta Persei rubbed his hands and looked at Yang Qindong with a smile and said, "Young master, it is said that the Mongolian cavalry is good at charging. If you want to fight with them this time, can you let me lead the charge?" He knew that Beta Persei wanted to lead the army. He was a person who loved to fight and kill. Yang Qindong sighed and thought about it before agreeing. "Well, if that's the case, I will arrange it for the young master when there is a chance." "Thank you, young master, thank you, young master." Beta Persei, who got Yang Qindong's agreement, immediately smiled. He felt that he was getting older and older. He was afraid that if he wanted to go on the battlefield, the chances would only get fewer and fewer. Since that was the case, he should take advantage of his youth and strength to perform well. When he got older and had a group of children and grandchildren, he would have something to brag about. Yang Qindong didn't know what Beta Persei was thinking. As someone close to him and his own family, he would take care of him if he had the chance. Although charging on the battlefield was very dangerous, it was not enough to make him worry about Beta Persei. After all, his status was there, and there would be many people to protect him on the battlefield. What he needed to do now was to consider his next move. If taking down Bulgar was revenge on the Golden Horde for daring to attack Wuxiang's Third Army, then destroying the entire Golden Horde was a necessary step for him to take over the world and make the Han Chinese the king of the world. Beta Persei passed down the order. All officers of the deputy division level and above should go to the general's mansion in the city for a meeting. Yang Qindong already had various ideas in his mind, and it was time for him to implement these decisions. The meeting was held in the general's mansion. Yang Qindong presided over the meeting, and he announced a series of military and city governance policies. 2 hours later, the generals received their orders and left. Then the granary in the city was opened. But unlike other places, this time they did not open the granary to release grain, but bartered with grain. To put it bluntly, it was to let the people bring all kinds of things to the general's mansion to sell, and then buy them in the form of Han coins. Then the people took these Han coins to the granary to buy grain and daily necessities. For example, refined salt, white sugar, soy sauce and iron pots. The five-star army also bought all kinds of things such as scrap metal, used weapons, and the furs of the wild beasts in the mountains as well as horses and sheep. The entire Golden Horde's territory did not lack mountains and dense forests. Before it was explored, the number of wild beasts in the mountains could be compared to a wild zoo in the future. As long as one was willing to take the risk, fighting a few tigers and black bears would not be a problem. Naturally, these furs were not worth much here, but if they were brought to the other inland provinces of Wuxia, it would be completely different. They could be sold for a high price, and it was possible to sell them for a few hundred times more than buying them. There was also a lot of rare mahogany in the mountains. The growth process of this kind of wood was slow, but it was abnormally strong. Furniture made of this wood could be sold for a sky-high price. And it just so happened that no one cared about the value of this item, so Yang Qindong did not hesitate to accept it. Using Han coins to buy mahogany was definitely a profitable thing. As for horses, cows and sheep, there were even more. The main thing was that the Mongolian people were not willing to take them out. However, using refined salt as bait should not be a problem. As for the used weapons, they were naturally useless in the hands of the people, but after they were sent back to Chichen City, they could be used again and become good things. In short, they chose the things that the commoners thought were worthless in exchange for the things that they needed. This was a win-win situation. Ahuli had heard Yang Qindong's detailed explanation during the meeting. Then he requested to stay at the general's residence to cooperate with the purchase. When the news came out, many people responded enthusiastically. They took the items that Yang Qindong wanted and exchanged them for a large amount of Han coins, then went back to the granary to buy what they needed. Ahuli's eyes widened. He saw the enthusiasm of the people, the huddling of the people, and the support of the people. This matter was fully in charge of the sacrifice. Speaking of which, he could be considered an all-rounder in both military and civilian affairs. When you get on a horse to conquer the world, when you get off a horse to rule the world, you get off a horse to rule the world. When he saw Ahuli's excited and enlightened expression, he patted his shoulder and said, "Learn, the great Bugnam of Gojosian is omnipotent." Yes, Bugnam of Gojosian is too amazing. This move not only allowed the people to quickly accept the new currency, but also received sincere praise and support from the people. Presumably, after this incident, the people no longer want the five-star army to leave this place. If someone insists on doing this, then they will become the common enemy of the people. Ahuli was indeed a smart person. From this incident he was able to see deeper things. Hearing this, Ahuli kept nodding. Then, when he looked to the south, he was already thinking that Yang Qindong would not have a problem conquering the Golden Horde. The question was how long it would take. At first, he was still not confident that he could defeat the Golden Horde and the Rasi principalities with only a few 100,000 soldiers. But now, he knew that once he won the hearts of the people, he could get as many soldiers as he wanted. In the past, he always heard Yang Qindong say that the people were the foundation, and the people were the foundation. He also knew this principle, including the saying that water can carry a boat, but it can also capsize a boat. This was the principle of the ancient sages. But why did so many people say that only Yang Qindong could do it? Shibi had thought about this before and finally came to a conclusion. That was, other people were just saying these words. The so-called people in their eyes were the upper-class people with the right to speak, especially the landowning households and the noble families. In Yang Qindong's eyes, the people were the real people. They were the lowest class of people. They were the people who were called lowly and could be sacrificed at any time. They were the people who were looked down upon by others. It might seem that Yang Qindong was wrong, but in reality the people at the bottom were the most common. Without them, there would be no one to farm, no one to do business, and no one to create things. The so-called high and mighty people were not far from starving and freezing to death. To borrow Teacher Guo's words, this was the difference between vulgarity and elegance. Elegance could not be separated from vulgarity, but vulgarity could be separated from elegance. Bulgar City, because of a series of measures, became lively again. On the streets, people could be seen taking their things to the general's mansion to exchange for Chinese currency. Then they took the Chinese currency to the granary to buy rice, salt, sugar, soy sauce, and iron pots. Especially when the courageous commoners had already bought the goods they needed with Chinese currency and walked proudly on the streets, the decree became a reality. More and more commoners were moved and started to take action. But the people here were too poor. There were still many people who were poor and had nothing. What could they do? It was simple. They could sell their labor to earn money. For example, they could become soldiers. As long as one signed up and passed the 5-star Army's test, they would become a glorious member of the 5-star Army. At the same time, they would be able to receive a monthly salary. Furthermore, they would be able to provide for 3 or 4 people in an ordinary family. Even if they couldn't provide for 8 or 10 people, they could at least provide for 3 or 4 people in an ordinary family. Men who were past the age could choose to work to earn money. Bulgar city was still too small. Yang Qindong was preparing to expand the city. This required manpower. Also, transporting all kinds of military supplies required labor. This was a lack of work. It was the same for women. They could weave and wash clothes for the soldiers. There were also some young women who did not have any attachments. They could go and work for the army. On this point, Yang Qindong was open to the foreign races. Apart from the fact that he could not force the women to work for the army and that there could not be any Han women, if the foreign race women were willing, he would not oppose it. The soldiers worked hard on the expedition. Every day, other than rushing, training and fighting, there was nothing else to do. In addition, when they first came here, even the female soldiers of the propaganda team did not follow them. Their days were incomparably boring. It was necessary for them to relax their minds and bodies. Otherwise, it would be easy for problems to arise. Chapter 14:21. Just like that, the 5-star Army was formed. Furthermore, the treatment of the soldiers of the 5-star Army was not low, and money was easy to earn. The only condition was that these women had to be healthy, and they had to be able to withstand investigation. If they were spies sent by the enemy, they would be killed as soon as they were discovered. They would not be soft-hearted. In short, after Yang Qindong became the ruler of Bulgar, it was as if the sky had changed. The people had more choices and there were more varieties and colors of food on their tables. Not long after, more and more logistics teams arrived in Bulgar. More and more goods appeared in the city, dazzling the eyes of the foreign races. Right now, they could only hate the fact that they did not have enough Chinese currency and could not buy everything they wanted. The transport team came and went in batches. When they came, they brought all kinds of supplies and rations. When they left, they brought with them all kinds of animal hides, scrap metal, and carriages of mahogany. Once these things were transported back to Crimson City, it would not take long for their value to increase by tens of times. At the very least, it would be enough to cover the expenses of the people and horses. In the past few years, potatoes, sweet potatoes, corn, and other high-yield crops were discovered. What Yangxia did not lack the least was food. The granaries of the various provinces were almost filled to the brim. Now that they could use food to exchange for the rare hides of the Central Plains, it could be considered a form of income. Not to mention the furniture made of mahogany. When brought back to Crimson City, they would be in high demand. They would not worry about not being able to sell them, but they would worry about not having enough. This was equivalent to using the money from trade to fight a war. This was also a manifestation of how knowledge could change one's fate. While others were still worrying about the cost of fighting a war, Yang Qindong could already make a fortune through fighting a war. With enough money and food, he would naturally have the confidence to fight a war. With money and rewards, the soldiers would want to perform meritorious deeds. This was a kind of virtuous cycle. How could it not be powerful? Just like when Yang Qindong was winning the hearts of the people and making money in Bulgar City, the new Second Army, under the leadership of several division commanders, had already begun to expand their territory. Before anyone knew that they had arrived, they had launched continuous attacks on cities and territories. Setting out from Bulgar City, they headed south. Within 2 months, they had taken down Khat City, Kilo City, and Kazan City, all the way to Samara City. Samara was the entrance to Sarai City, the capital of the Golden Horde. In other words, once this place was conquered, the safety of the Golden Horde's capital would be directly threatened. This was something that Great Khan Mahama would never allow to happen. It was only a month ago that Mahama, who had escaped from Khat City, found out about the fall of Bulgar City. The furious Mahama couldn't understand why the 5-star Army's reinforcements had come so quickly, nor why they had the guts to cause trouble for the Golden Horde. Speaking of which, Mahama was a very domineering person. Ever since he became the 39th monarch of the Golden Horde, although the strength of the Rasi Duchy was slowly rising, he had always been in a position to suppress them. In history, when the Rasi Duchy became independent, this great Khan had already passed away many years ago. Of course, the main reason why the Rossi Duchy became independent was because the Golden Horde had begun to split, which gave them an opportunity to take advantage of. Perhaps because of his experience, Mahama was a very conceited person. He had always been the one bullying others. Since when did others have the chance to find trouble with him? After learning about this, he first reprimanded his generals for their incompetence. How could they not have received the news that such an important city like Bulgar City had been lost? At the same time, he hurriedly mobilized all the troops stationed at the border of the Rossi Duchy from the west to the north. He wanted to take care of the five-star army first and let them know who was the real king in this realm. This time, Mahama ordered his general, Gray, to lead 50,000 elite cavalrymen to Samara City and make preparations for the five-star army's arrival. Mahama and his generals had already analyzed the situation. As an outsider, the King Wunan of Damyang would not be able to fight a protracted battle with them. Just the cold winter temperature alone was not something they could handle. Therefore, the other party would definitely think of a way to end the battle quickly. Since that was the case, all they had to do was wait for the other party to arrive. The terrain outside Kazan City was wide and suitable for a cavalry charge. When the time came, he would let this outsider know that the so-called Great Ming dynasty was just a two-legged sheep after so many years. As the descendants of Genghis Khan, the Golden Horde did not lack elite cavalrymen. They were good at war and came and went like the wind, giving people a headache. Even the Rossi Duchy, which had a certain number of firearms, had a headache. Speaking of the Rossi Duchy, after Ivan's army was defeated in Tove City, he returned to Moscow unwillingly. Not long after he entered the city, he received news that after Wu Sheng's Third Army and the Five-Star Army's reinforcements met up, they left the destroyed Tove City and headed for Oxino City, occupying it. While they were recuperating, they were like a tiger watching a nail over the Rossi Duchy. As the saying goes, how could one allow others to sleep beside one's bed? The Five-Star Army's actions were seen as a threat and a provocation by the Rossi people. Not long after Ivan entered the city, he received news that his father-in-law was going to send troops to eliminate the Five-Star Army. At the very least, they were going to be chased out. With regards to his father-in-law's decision, Ivan raised both his hands in approval. Especially after fighting a battle with them and witnessing their abilities, he was even more convinced. In his eyes, the Five-Star Army was an existence that was on par with the Golden Horde. In the main hall, when Ivan arrived, all his generals were already standing there. They were listening to Vanya's report on the Battle of Tove City. Vanya knew the importance of this matter, so he did not exaggerate. Instead, he reported the entire battle truthfully. At the end of his report, he even said, "I don't think there was anything wrong with our command in this battle. I can only say that the Five-Star Army's cavalry was too strong. The Five-Star Army's ability was even stronger than the elite cavalry of the Golden Horde. They were not even afraid of the rumbling of cannons. They were a terrifying opponent. Stronger than the cavalry of the Golden Horde." After these words were spoken, many people in the imperial court chuckled. It was no wonder that they thought so. The Golden Horde was one of the purest descendants of the Mongol army. Many of their cavalry started practicing archery when they first learned how to walk. Who could possibly be their opponent? In the face of such mocking laughter, Vanya did not respond. On the contrary, he maintained his silence. This was his way of protecting himself. The reason why he was not a direct descendant of the Grand Duke of Blindness, but still had his own position in the court, and others could not do anything to him, was because of this caution and carefulness. After all, he had already spoken the truth. As for whether they believed it or not, it had nothing to do with him. Seeing that Vanya did not respond, Ivan, who had just arrived, was not happy. His face darkened as he said, "Everyone, there is nothing funny about this. The strength of the Five-Star Army's cavalry will only be beyond your imagination." Ah! It would have been better if Ivan did not speak. His words caused even more laughter. What's going on? The smart Ivan sensed that something was wrong. He also did not know that when the news of his defeat came, Tugnev of the Vyatka city said in the court that their young master would definitely exaggerate the strength of the Five-Star Army's reinforcements to reduce his own guilt. At that time, many people heard it. Now that Ivan said it like this, wasn't it a confirmation of his words? Everyone recalled Tugnev's words. No wonder they laughed so loudly. The blind Grand Duke was also present that day. He also heard what Ivan said. When he saw his son Ivan jump out, his expression was not good. "Ivan, it's good that you're back. This battle has been hard on you. Go back and have a good rest." This was telling him that he would not be needed in the upcoming battle against the five-star army. How could Ivan be willing to let this go? He immediately wanted to refute loudly, "Father-in-law, your son? Enough, this is an order, not a discussion." The blind Grand Duke displayed the dignity that a person in his position should have. Then he ignored Ivan and asked the ministers, "Oxino City is our territory. Our citizens are there. We must take it back. Who is willing to lead troops to complete this extermination mission?" Tugnev, who had long wanted to show off his skills, was waiting for these words. He immediately stepped out and said, "This general is willing." Speaking of which, Oxino City was actually one of Tugnev's areas of influence. If there was trouble there, as the true master, he definitely could not stand by and do nothing. The court meeting ended. Ivan was left behind to meet with his father alone. When there was no one else around, Ivan looked at his father with an unconvinced expression. He believed that his wise father-in-law would definitely give him a reason. "Are you unconvinced?" Although his vision was limited, especially in his left eye, the Grand Duke of Blindness could still sense Ivan's dissatisfaction. Ifan didn't hold back. He was indeed very emotional. "Father-in-law, what your son said is true. This five-star army cavalry is very strong. If we don't pay attention to them, our army will definitely be at a disadvantage. Father-in-law believes what you said." Before Ivan could continue, the blind Grand Duke had already concluded. This time Ivan was at a loss for what to do. Fortunately, the blind Grand Duke continued speaking. "Since you are so sure, what is there to worry about? Some people will definitely hit a nail on the head. Some people will definitely look down on their opponents. Since that is the case, why not let them suffer some losses? Whether it is the five-star army's defeat or Tugnev's defeat, it is not a bad thing for our duchy, is it not?" Chapter 1422. At this moment, Ivan suddenly realized that his father-in-law wanted to use the five-star army to wear down Turgenev's strength. "Sai, you should know that your father-in-law has been painstakingly managing the Rossi principalities all these years, but not everyone supports our actions. For example, Maxim, Turgenev, and Vanya are the representatives. They have their own territories, their own forces, and even their own armies. They also have a group of nobles who are dissatisfied with us supporting them. Unless there is a legitimate reason, we can't do anything to them. If that's the case, why don't we let them fight the five-star army? Just as you said, the opponent is very strong. Let them fight it out among themselves. When the time comes, whoever wins or loses will be beneficial to us." This was the Duke's plan. Ivan finally understood and was in a good mood. "Father-in-law, I was wrong." Seeing that his son understood his father's decision so quickly, the blind Duke was also very happy. But then he asked worriedly, "Is the five-star army's cavalry really that strong? Turgenev won't defeat them, right?" "Absolutely not. If we are cautious, we might be able to use a large number of cannons and double the number of soldiers, but with Turgenev's arrogance, we will definitely lose," Ivan said with an incomparably resolute tone. As for Turgenev, after receiving the military order in the court, he returned to his residence in high spirits and began to mobilize his troops. He didn't believe Ivan's words. As for Vanya, although he was also on their side, he had always been timid and cautious. His words were also not trustworthy. This time he wanted to teach the five-star army a lesson and let them know who was the real strong on the battlefield. He wasn't the only one who thought so. The nobles who supported Turgenev also had the same opinion. Although they didn't have much contact with the Han army, they had fought with the Golden Horde for more than 200 years. From their words, it was clear who was stronger between the White Russians and the Han army. The Han people were called two-legged sheep by the Golden Horde. According to them, when faced with the attack of the Mongol cavalry, the Han people either fled or surrendered. They didn't even have the courage to resist. In comparison, the White Russians were much more courageous. Didn't this prove that they were stronger than the Han army? With the support of the nobles, provisions were naturally no longer a problem. Turgenev took his own 80,000 soldiers and the 20,000 soldiers he got from the Grand Duke of the Blind, a total of 100,000 people, 100 cannons and 10,000 muskets to the north. In Kazan City, Yang Qindong arrived at the city under the protection of the Black Cavalry. Behind him, not only had Bulgar been liberated and a large amount of trade had begun. Even Kot City and Kilo City, which had been taken down, had also begun to reform. The people of the Golden Horde, who had always relied on the heavens for food, didn't know that there were so many good things in the world. Moreover, they didn't need to fight or risk their lives. As long as they worked hard, they could obtain all of this. With food and water and the hope of a better life, the three cities were quickly stabilized and more Mongolian citizens were willing to work for them. Regardless of whether it was building the city, reclaiming the land, building roads, or mining, they were all very enthusiastic. Just like what Yang Qindong said before, these people had been suffering for too long. Now, as long as they put in some effort, no one would be stupid enough to go against the five-star army. In the face of a bright future, the so-called ethnic background was worthless. If they didn't study, they wouldn't have the wisdom of the people. These people also had their own advantages. It was very simple to distinguish right from wrong. They would help whoever was good to them. As for ethnic background, the barbarians didn't care too much about it. Of course, there were some troublemakers among them. Yang Qindong didn't show any mercy to these people. He killed those who needed to be killed and captured those who needed to be captured. After purposefully removing the troublemakers, the rest of the Mongol people became very obedient. They also received a lot of benefits and their living conditions improved. Now, many Mongol people were worried about how long this kind of life could last. After all, the land they occupied was the territory of the Golden Horde. If the Great Khan brought his army over, would the Han army be able to withstand it? Yang Qindong didn't know whether to laugh or cry at this kind of worry. However, this was a good thing. In order to solve the worries and doubts in everyone's hearts, Yang Qindong personally came to Kazan City and went to the front line. He used his actions to tell those who had doubts in their hearts that he was at the front line. If there was any danger, it would be directed at him. Everyone could rest assured and develop in peace. They could work hard to support their families and strive for a better life. As soon as he arrived at Kazan City, a telegram came from Chichen City. It could be said that there was good news one after another. After the first successful steam engine, the field artillery was also successfully produced in batches. This had entered the final stage of development before Yang Qindong left. Now, all kinds of difficulties had been overcome and it was successfully produced. The credit for this was also due to the efforts of the first city. Yumian and Tiger's Mane fully implemented his ideas. After the first city was completely stabilized, a large number of mining operations began. For a time, a lot of iron, copper, molybdenum, coal, zinc, gold, lead, and tungsten were developed and transported to Chichen City through the three eastern provinces. With sufficient raw materials, all kinds of experiments took a big step forward and the success rate began to increase. After ruling Crimson City for more than a decade, Yang Qindong had invested a huge sum of money into it. Now that he was finally reaping the rewards, Yang Qindong could not help but breathe a sigh of relief. The emergence of all kinds of advanced products meant that Wuxia had taken a key step from light industry to heavy industry. The world was still dominated by cold weapons and firearms were just in a budding state. Wuxia's various scientific research results were undoubtedly the most advanced among them. What was there to be afraid of? Just like the field artillery, it was named by Yang Qindong, but it first appeared in history in 1897. A French artillery research team formed by General Douiville, Colonel de Boer, and Captain Romeo invented the 75mm field artillery. This was the world's first modern cannon in history. The 75mm field artillery was developed according to the patent of the German Hausen. It used the long recoil principle, but Germany refused to use long recoil cannons. This kind of field artillery had a powerful power. The 75mm cannon was the first field artillery that completely solved the recoil problem. The cannon body could be slid on a cradle through a guide wheel. The cradle was mounted on the cannon frame, and the cannon frame was connected to the piston rod in the cylinder. When the cannon was recoiled, the piston would compress the hydraulic oil, and a portion of the hydraulic oil would enter the chamber through a small valve to compress the air. When the cannon reached the end of the recoil, the compressed air would return to its original position. This was the main reason why the 75mm field artillery was so good. Now Yang Qindong was the first to have it. This was the first time other than Daikara that a large cannon had been successfully created. Compared to Daikara's cannon, which required all kinds of excuses to be taken out, the appearance of the field artillery was undoubtedly a very important step forward. Although this type of cannon could only fire iron bullets, it was created through his own hard work. It was also a big step forward. Send a message to the Chichen City munitions factory to continue to develop explosive bullets based on the original iron bullets. Send a message to City Lord Yu Qian to coordinate with the relevant departments and find a way to move a portion of the munitions factory to the city and build it nearby. Send a message to Tiger's Mane and Yangtze to keep a close eye on the munitions factory, especially to prevent spies from entering. If the technology is leaked, they will be killed. Also, send a message to the governor of the 3 eastern provinces, Lu Ji and General Yi Ligang. Tell them to do their best to transport the field artillery and send a batch to us as soon as possible. Yang Qindong, who gave a series of orders, wiped his fists. He couldn't wait to see the field artillery that could shoot up to 6 miles away in his hands, and the moment it showed its power on the battlefield. After dealing with these matters, the reform of Kazan City began. With the experience of the previous 3 cities, everything was carried out in an orderly manner. Other than a portion of the army, the rest of the army was ready to go all out against the Golden Horde's army. Originally, Yang Qindong wanted to use the 100mm mortar in Daikura to attack Salai City and directly threaten the Golden Horde's Xinjiang. But after receiving the news of the field artillery, he decided to wait. If he could use the artillery to deal with the enemy, why would he need the soldiers to fight on the battlefield? So after arriving at Kazan City, he stopped here and did not move forward. He only waited for the artillery to arrive before carrying out the next step of the military operation. And now what he needed to do most was to prepare for the winter. Yes, although it was only the beginning of July and the weather was very hot, it was still necessary to prepare for the winter. This was due to the climate in Eastern Europe. Winter alone lasted for half a year, which was one of the main reasons for the poverty here. Without enough time to do what needed to be done, it was indeed difficult to develop. In order to live well in the winter, a source of fire was indispensable, and warm clothes were also indispensable. Yang Qindong had already started to prepare for these. A large number of cotton-padded clothes and high-grade down jackets were made by the Chichen City clothing factory and sent here. Some of the coal mines near Bulgar City were also located by Yang Qindong and were being mined. There were also some coal furnaces built by the ironware factory in Chichen City that were being transported. Even some greenhouses were being built so that there would be enough sparse vegetables in the winter. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.